Dad, I was just wondering some of your earliest memories as a child. What are some of the earliest things you can remember as a boy, and even maybe almost as a baby?
Okay. I'd like to talk about things that happened probably before I ever went to grade school and before Dad had his first nervous breakdown. We didn't have a car, and Dad was the kind of a person that talked about his days in the logging camps, and he made everything so real, so big and so important. I don't mean he exaggerated, but he had such a way of telling things that it stuck by you. You never forgot it. It had such big meaning. And when I was real small, I remember walking with him up to Myron's, and I know I wasn't 6 years old yet. I was younger than that. And we cut across right up through the woods here, cut across the field, and right on the line fence between us and the Berg farm, I was barefooted and I stepped on a thorn apple, and it went in my foot. And I can remember how Dad squeezed it and pulled it out, because it was probably in a ½ inch, and he pulled it out and then he sucked on the spot, and he squeezed it so it didn't hurt me, and I thought, what a powerful guy. He was such a kind of an idol in a way, the way he could do things, everything he did, even the work. He taught me as a little boy to do everything, make it easy, the work. And he could get such enthusiasm in it that, it made me do the same today. I plan. When I walk to the barn, I'm picking something up. I walk someplace else, I'm picking something up. And Dad was really clever to do that. And I can still see him fixing buildings up so they were warm. He had a finesse about him that to make everything, tighten it up so it was warm, and the chicken coops and all that stuff. And he was really impressive. I always felt he should have been a banker as I got older, because he was so outstanding with figures. He loved to figure. And we'd be doing things, and he'd be figuring and talking and multiplying out in his mind, how many dozen of this eggs and what the chickens did and what the weather was. And he kept track of the weather on calendars. He'd write down what the weather was. And then he could always talk about, so many years ago on such and such a date, the temperature was such, or a snowstorm. And I would think, how in the world can that be? That don't seem important to me, growing up. But he remembered back. Just fantastic, the mind he had. And then we didn't have a car. And by the way, the day he pulled his thorn out of my foot, we were going to Myron's. And that was on a Sunday. And that kind of was the high spot for us, and it was for him, because at the Myron farm, they had the first electric lights, they had the first radio with earphones, and Paul remembers that too. When he was a kid, he went up there with us, and we sat and listened to the radio with the earphones, and they were so great to share everything that they had. We looked up to them so, but it was for everybody. And you'd go up there, and it was kind of a meeting place on a Sunday. The Hanson boys would be there from Dude Valley, Frederick and Aaron, and maybe 3, 4 more boys. The Knorr boys would come down there, and maybe Garrett Gregerson. And then they'd holler coffee. In the house, they'd holler coffee. And everybody went in there for coffee, and my mother would say, now you can't go in and have coffee, she'd tell us ahead of time. You can't do that, there's so many. But they would not accept that. And then old Betsy was there, and they made donuts that weren't very big. They were probably, quite of a small donut, a fry cake. But I never ate better fry cakes. They were really good. And that's the place where I learned to drink coffee when I was a kid, because they always had coffee. And then what really was impressive to us, we never heard of a woman smoking, and Ole and Tootie smoked. And they had a screen porch on the east side of the house that faced the road, and there was an old car seat, like from a back seat of a sedan car, with leather, or whatever it was made out of. It looked like leather. And those two would sit there, and Ole would go and get this tobacco they used. It was a real cheap grade. They bought it in a bag about that high and about that big around. It was called corn cake. Never heard of it before, but that's what they always smoked. And Ole would go and fill his pipe and fill hers, and they'd sit out there, hand in hand, sitting, talking in Norwegian, and he'd light his pipe, and he'd light hers up for him, and they'd sit there, and we were raised that was awfully bad to do something like that, but we could not see anything wrong because those people were so great in our mind that I'll never forget that, how I could never look down at her for smoking. And then I found out she had a toothache. And that's how she started smoking. That kind of stopped the toothache. So they were like two lovebirds always. Those two sat smoking. And then as I got older, I could come up there when they were milking, and Tootie was always out in the barn milking with them. They each had their stool and each milked cows. And I could never understand Ole because he talked fast, and he talked Norwegian pretty much, and she talked Norwegian, and she was from a part of Norway where they kind of sang their Norwegian when they talked to you. There's a name for it, Uplander or something. And that was so different than any other Norwegians, but that was a favorite place to go. And then Benny was an idol to me, and he was so good to me as a kid. Would take me hunting deer, the first guy I ever hunted deer with at 14. And we hunted ducks together after I got out of grade school. We made a blind down on the river. And Benny had everything, you know, he furnished the guns and he had the shells and he had everything, and just glad that I'd go with him. But I guess probably one of the most outstanding things, I'm getting ahead of myself, was backing up a ways. Our milk went to Armour's back in those days, Armour truck, and they went to Bloomer and they condensed the milk in little tin cans, and they could use it like for coffee cream. It was kind of a thicker milk that was boiled down. And Herbie Gaylor was our milk hauler, and he was real young then. He had a Model A, and the milk truck came down one morning, and Herbie unloaded a beautiful handmade little bobsled that I still have in the granary. And I knew nothing about it. I don't think my folks knew anything about it. Maybe it was arranged, but I never ever learned. And it was painted green. And Benny had made it from scratch, and it was just a replica of a big sleigh. Every part of it. It had the bunks, it swiveled, it turned, and it had a nice handle, and it had about a 12-inch bolt through it that you'd hook on with your hands to pull it. And that was used for more than just hauling wood in. Of course, on Saturdays I always hauled wood in with it and filled a storm porch for wood for a week. That was my job on Saturdays. But besides that, Grandpa used it to haul water from the barn where the pump was. We had a gas engine that pumped water, and we had 400 chickens usually, and he'd haul 2 cans at a time, or maybe it was 3. And we had a regular track from the barn to the chicken coop, and it was always kind of tickled me. I felt he was using my sled. Put those cans on, and when I got big enough I could pull it if somebody put them on for me, and could pull them over the chicken coop, and that's the way we got water to the chickens. We didn't have any pump in the house, in the chicken's house, and that bobsled was used for that. But then in the summertime we had a regular cart that wheeled cans that would hold 4 cans, and we still have that. It's out behind the granary, but it's all rusted out. But that was a neat thing, and we used to use that for kind of a fun thing to play on. You just give somebody a ride on it and stuff. It had big high wheels and it rolled real easy. But that's some of my memories. And then I can remember being in the barn because I like milk and still do. And when it was time to milk cows, I was probably 4 or 5 years old. I used to take a little tin cup, a metal one, and go to the barn, and they'd squirt fresh milk right from the cow's quarter in the cup, and I always drink a half a cup or a cup of that warm, and I just had a real taste for it and liked that. So I've been kind of a half calf all my life, I guess. I like milk, and I still like hot milk. And then I can remember the barn. We had lanterns, and Dad was extremely cautious for fire. And we'd have a lantern. He made it so real that fire was such a terrible thing. And we never ever had a fire. We had chimney fire a few times. But we'd go up in the barn with a lantern, and lanterns were funny. Once in a while they could act up, and they would give off a flame kind of when something wasn't right with the wick, I suppose. And they would act up, and I can remember being up in the barn with Dad putting down hay in the evening, I suppose. It was dark early. And something acted up with the lantern. He threw it right out in the snowbank. He was so deathly scared of fire that the lantern was going to explode. And that was pounded into me, the fear of fire, to be really careful. And we had 2 lanterns in the barn we milked, you know, and it had to keep the chimneys clean. And they'd get smoky. And I remember taking newspaper. Grandma could do that with newspaper, and then you could kind of wash them and you'd polish them with dry newspaper, and how nice they'd shine. Then we had to have real good lights for milking. We'd think that was pretty good. And I can always remember the coziness of the barn. It was cold outside, but when you came in the barn, it was always warm, and to milk those cows. And he had his barn always tight, so it wasn't freezing in there ever. And the smell of the barn with the nice straw under the cows and the hay, it was just, I always thought it was quite a place. And of course, as kids, everything had to be, the fun was involved around the barn and calves. We all had calves that we fed and played with them and sat on their backs and stuff. And you know, and we never had many. We always raised about 5, I think, 4 or 5 for heifer replacements. And then once in a while we'd raise a veal calf and let it get big enough to butcher. And that was heartbreaking to butcher the calf that we liked, you know. That was pretty hard to take. And I can remember Dad and Oscar Hovland butchering a pig or butchering an animal. And of course I had to be along and see that. I remember they'd shoot it with a gun and they'd slice the throat. And Mother didn't believe in blood, but the Hovlands did, where they'd catch the blood and then they'd make a wonderful tasting sausage out of it. It would have raisins in it, and I suppose some kind of sugar. It was blood that would be cooked some way with other meats like a sausage, and it was very good tasting. And that was okay on Dad's side, but my mother on her side, they didn't think that was quite right. But I can remember we still got it. They'd make it, and that was kind of special. But I always thought that was strange when they'd slice the neck of something and catch that warm blood, and maybe get 5-6 quarts. They'd make this out of it. And it was very healthful. Can you imagine you put raisins in something? Raisins, and I think there was rice put in it. And that was an old Norwegian thing. And I think they called it klub, if I remember right.
What about Irene, Dad, your sister? What are your earliest memories of Irene?
Well, Irene didn't, yeah, she came out in the barn, she played, we did all kinds of stuff like that, but Irene was in the house, and she was a piano player from the very small on. She was always playing a piano, and Irene missed some of the fun I had because she was such an excellent student. She was a student in everything, and a perfectionist. It just had to be like that. And then in school there was another Irene Larson. There was kind of a race between them, and they both had to excel, so where I rolled along and more happy-go-lucky, and that wasn't quite that important to me. But Irene was a fun person. And we always had cats. Dad liked cats, and Irene liked cats. Mother didn't, but the cats got in the house, but they never let the dog in the house very much. But Dad always had a tomcat that he liked real good that would come in the house when he ate, and would sit by his boots. He had leather top boots and rubber bottoms that were sewed on, and he'd be sitting eating, and he had one cat that would come up to him and he'd scratch on his leg till he fed him something, and he'd reach down and give him part of his bread, and Grandma would get kind of mad at him, but that never stopped him. The cats always followed Dad, or he'd be walking from the barn to the chicken coop, and one of his favorite cats would be riding on his shoulder. He'd be pulling the sled with water, and I always thought that was kind of cute, but he really liked cats. And then Irene would take the cats, bring a cat in the house. And this is one of the tricks that she used to do that we thought was so much fun. We'd get catnip in the fall. We'd put up some bags of catnip, and then for kind of a treat when we had entertainment, we'd get a cat in the house, you know, a real pet, and get a little catnip and give it to them, and they'd roll in it, and they'd get just silly and play. And then another trick of hers, she'd like to take a cat and roll paper and tie this on their back feet. and then watch them walk, and they'd lift their feet high, laugh and have fun with that. Then I remember we had a dog we called Limperty. She did that with the dog too. So I mean, you know, it was just lots of humor. It was real cheap fun. Didn't cost anything, but we sure had a lot of fun doing things. And Irene was very fun that way. She liked to do all kinds of stuff. But I can remember as she got older, she was coming in the house, she was always playing the piano, and that's why she's such a good piano player today, because she was a perfectionist and just did it upright.
What about the coming of Paul and Bud into the family? How old were you then?
Oh, I was probably I'm going to say I was 4 years old when they came. And I can remember how I liked them, and of course they were good to me. Teased me a lot, but that never bothered me. I enjoyed the teasing, I suppose. But they were really good to me, and Bud was kind of an idol to me because he was older than Paul, and he always paid a lot of attention to me. And Paul liked to sing, and he was in the house more, where Bud went with Dad a lot, fencing and stuff. He always took him along with him because he was a little bigger. But Paul did more things, I think, around the house, helping and stuff like that. And then Bud left before Paul went to Chicago, and that was kind of the end of Bud for years. But Paul stayed here till he went to high school, and he went to Colfax. But they always came back. You know, the farm was still their home because they'd been with us enough years. It was their really home. And I can remember that Mother would say to me, if it wouldn't have been for Bud and Paul, that we would have had more children in our family. And I always thought, man, that would have been something. And then I was a twin, and my twin brother smothered in birth, and that always kind of made me wonder, not then till I got older, and of course as I got older, how I would love to have had a brother, but it wasn't to be, I guess. So I was the only child and a baby, and was favored an awful lot by Grandma. I think I was, in Grandma's sight, I was a little like Joe and Paul's sight. I couldn't do nothing wrong. I mean, I was the man that did the work to help Grandpa. And of course my days were pretty happy until Dad had his first nervous breakdown, and that was really tough on me because...
How old were you, Dad?
I was in about 1934. 1934, 21 from 34 would be 13, yeah. That'd be about the year I came out of grade school. It was a dry year, and Dad had his first nervous breakdown. And that was hard for me to understand because Dad was such a happy-go-lucky, happy person when he was normal. And when he got that way, he didn't want to see people. He wanted to hide under the quilts. He was sickly. He couldn't work. And that's when Mother and I had to just take over and kind of run the farm. So I had so much responsibility as a kid, I never learned how to really play.
Did you have any sense, Dad, that was coming on? Could you see any signs?
Oh, yes, yeah. He'd lose his appetite. But the first time when it came on was in the fall of 34, I believe. And he'd been fighting fire up at Garfield Nest as their barn burned, and he was up on the granary, pouring water on the granary. They were bucket brigading it up to him, and he sat on the roof throwing water on the roof, and he got overheated. And we kind of blamed it to that, but Uncle Oscar died that year, and that was his farm partner. He wasn't active, but he was the railroad man. He was his half-brother, and Dad thought highly of him. We all did. We looked up to Uncle Oscar as somebody really special and outstanding, and whatever Uncle Oscar was in politics, Grandpa was for, because he respected him so much. And we idolized in him because he had a pass, came down on the train, and they'd do their farm figuring. You know, a couple times a year they'd come down. And that was really a high point in our life, and Mother thought the world of him. We all liked him very much. And then Dad would break down, you see, and he wouldn't be in very good shape for 7-8 months. And it was hard because it was hard for me to understand why everything looked so gloomy to him. It looked so bad, and because everything looked so great to me, because I was a happy person. And the neighbors and the fun, and my dad couldn't joke or have any fun when he was like that. And you know, we thought he was going to die and everything else, you know, but the doctor told him, and I was with him, sitting right with Peter Middleford at the clinic in Eau Claire. And I can remember Peter Middleford sitting on the desk, and he said to Dad, he said, this will come, when you think you're the worst, you're getting better, it'll come and it'll go, and you'll have it again, he said. And you know, there was no pills, no medicine, no nothing for it at that time. And that's the way it worked. He would go along, he'd be good for over a year. And then maybe in haying it'd be hot weather, and you'd see Dad start to lose his appetite, and you knew it was coming back on him. And you know, Mother was really wonderful to nurse him along, coax him to eat. He couldn't eat. And it was hard for me. And then I got old enough, you know, that I was up 17 years old, I suppose, 16 years old. And I was old enough to go fishing with Harvey Austin. We each had bikes. We got bikes in 1955, new ones.
Not 55.
No, 1935.
35.
Yeah. And we got new bikes. Remember, they came on the 4th of July at the depot up there. I got a new Hawthorne.
This is the depot in New Auburn?
The depot in New Auburn came in a wooden crate, and Dad had a Model T. We went up there and picked them up and put them together, and Harvey had a new one, I had a new one, and Ed had a new one. Ed worked for Herman Hublin, and Harvey worked for Solphysys. And he was our closest neighbor, and Harvey couldn't have been finer to me. He always looked out for me in the crews thrashing when they picked on me and stuff. He was always kind of watching out for me. And he was really true blue. Probably one of the finest guys that I ever grew up with. So we spent a lot of time together, and that helped me because I couldn't stand to be around the house when Dad was like that. I just wanted to get out of here because everything was so great in my book, and then to listen to somebody so depressed, it just kind of cut me. And I'd go to school in the morning, maybe go downtown for a penny's worth of candy, and I'd hear the guys coming into their milk and laughing and talking at the creamery, and my dad wasn't that way, and it kind of hurt me, I guess. It just kind of bothered me, so it kind of drove me to get out of the house whenever I could, get out where there's people that you could joke and have fun with, seemed like. But then he'd get over it. It would seem like it would come on in the summer, and then by spring they'd be starting the lumber mill down here at Hendrickson's, and Dad was a great lumber grader. He was so good mathematically, he could stand and take lumber away from a saw and scale it right as he took it away. And that was kind of a gift he had. And they would coax him to come, and that would always turn him around, it seemed like. He'd think he couldn't, but they'd say, you just try it. And it seemed like when he got back working with something he liked so well, pretty soon it would lift, and then he'd be okay for that year again. But about every other year, or sometimes even oftener, he'd break down. But it seemed to be always in the haying, he'd start losing his appetite. And I got so we could detect when it was coming.
Was there any history of that, Dad, in his family?
So we could detect when it was coming.
Was there any history of that, Dad, in his family? In Grandpa's family?
No.
So it was really unpredictable.
Yeah, it was unpredictable. It's a weakness.
Yeah.
And Irina's had the same trouble, and my mother was the opposite, and I guess I get some of that from her because, I've gone through some awful trials and tests in business and strained financially, but I never cracked like that, and I think that's been great because it's funny I didn't. But evidently I'm not born with that, and I guess I got my mother's patience and calmness. Things don't shake me up.
Dad, thinking back when you were younger too, with Paul and Bud and Irene, can you think of any silly pranks or funny things that you guys did?
Oh, sure. I can remember in the barn they had BB guns, and the alley in front of the cattle, seemed real long then, but of course it would be just nothing now with the barn. And the trick was to go down and stand bend over and let somebody shoot you in the seat with a BB gun. And of course, you had to learn to catch on how to do that. If you bent over and had your pants real tight, it really stung. They were a little loose, it didn't sting quite so much. And Buddy was a great one to get Paul. He got Paul to bite, and he'd do that, shoot him in the seat. He got him to bend over and dare him. And then they were always playing tricks on me. Well, the Olsen boys, you see, we met with the Olsens for Sunday school and stuff and had church in the houses. So we spent a lot of time at Martin's, Bud and Paul too, when they grew up, and Harley and the boys. There was a time that they bribed me into eating angleworms. They claimed they did, so they had me swallowing whole angleworms. And I remember squeezing the manure out of them, or the dirt, that they're a great insect that will purify your soil. There's nothing finer than angleworms going through, eating the soil, pooping it out, and that's a perfect mixture, supposedly, as far as the quality of the soil for growing. But we would squeeze the dirt out of it and then swallow it. Then I learned afterwards they were just bribing me that they didn't swallow them, but I did. But it never made me sick. But when you could swallow an angleworm, you're pretty dairy. So everybody got a challenge, but I guess I was one of the few that would do that. And they always called me Bruno. That's a nickname the Toycens put on me. I always went by Bruno as a kid.
Do you know where that came from, Dad? The Bruno?
Yeah, let's see. It was on the Toycen side. I wonder if Uncle Parents didn't do it. I think Uncle Parents started calling me Bruno. I think so. And I went by that, by Alfred Johnson as a little kid in the thrashing crews. He called me Bruno. I remember that, you know, and I wondered why they did that. So I went by Bruno. And then the Olsons, my nickname with the Olsons was Bunnan, because Grandma called me Bunnan. Instead of Bruno, she called me Bunnan as a little kid. And
does that have a meaning, Dad?
I don't know. I don't think so.
Not Norwegian?
No, I don't think so. So then instead of calling me Bunnan, they called me Bunny. Bunny. That was my nickname with the Olsen tribe. But the Toycens came around, it was always Bruno. Uncle Dermot and all of them, they called me Bruno.
Dad, what was church like then? You met in church?
We met in houses.
Yeah,
we met at Olsen's or here, or McDonald's, kind of the three places, and Pruzik's. And we'd get together for Bible study and prayer meetings. And then there were always getting some evangelists coming in, tent meetings and stuff. We'd go to that. Then we used to go up to, Aunt Martha lived up in Maple Grove. And that was a big trip up there. There was a hill on D where the Covenant Church is. Instead of turning to go south on D there at the corner, you went straight west. And Dad had nicknames for everything. And that hill was really a long one. And with a Model T, if he could make that in high, turn the corner and just pour the coal to it and make it in high, then it was really hitting good. And that was his goal. And it was so comical when he was trying to go up that hill before he'd shift into low. He'd rock the car like that, kind of like he's getting it to go a little farther. And that always, if the car made that in high, it was really tuned up right. And then if the weather was damp, it had more power than Model T. But he called that the come and go road. And I'll have to tell you about that. Right across the road from Aunt Martha's, the Spriggs lived. And Howard Sprigg was married to Clifford Nelson's cousin. Yeah, down here. And he had a big family. And he was kind of a free like the Pentecost a little bit. There wasn't Pentecost yet then, but they didn't belong to any church, and kind of free worship thing.
That's what that meant when you say free, that was kind of a nickname?
Yeah, that was a nickname I suppose the rest of the churches put on them, because they didn't have any, they weren't a congregation established or organized. They called them the Frees, but they were very spiritual people, kind of a revival amongst them. You see, that's where Grandpa Olsen, he was sitting in the churches under conviction crying, and nobody paid any attention to him. So when he was converted, they branched out and started their own little deal, and that's where the Olsens come by with some of that. But anyway, this road that Grandpa called the come and go road when he went up to Aunt Martha's, and then we went up this steep hill a little ways, and then it turned and went north for about a mile, and then Martha was down a long grade down this beautiful road down to her house, and she had a nice new house. Their house burned when I was just a little kid, and then she got a new house. And Howard Sprigg lived across the road, and he had chickens. He was a chicken farmer like Dad liked to, and they had a lot in common in chickens. But they had tent meetings up there quite often, and we used to go up there for tent meetings. And Dad named it Come and Go Road because Howard Sprigg would always get up and request a song, Come and Go With Me to My Father's House. So Dad always picked up funny things like that. He called it, that was the Come and Go Road. Yeah, you get me started on some of Dad's stories, things that he called, and I have trouble the same thing, comparisons if I get a name for somebody, but he sure had a lot of them. And he had names for the cats, and he had names for he had a cat he called Balderdash. I don't remember how he ever got that name. Sewell, I think, put that on it when they were kids or something. He tells about that. And they always did funny things with animals. But we had the river, and of course that was a high spot as kids. We could go swimming, and we all learned to swim right away. And we could go swimming. And Dad always talked about all the things he did on the river with the Hovland boys, and they got together and stuff, but he never went. I only remember Dad going swimming with me once.
Really?
Yeah, he was very, I can't know how to explain it, but he was very private-like. You wouldn't think of undressing, going and swimming like we went in naked, us boys, and nobody's around. But Dad never went in with us but one time. Then he had long underwear on, if I remember right. He looked kind of comical. He wore drawers, they called it, but they were long legs. And he had that on in haying, claimed that kept the heat out. And then he wore top drawers that had sleeves, down to here, but they were cut off up here. But they were quite heavy and warm, and they just dressed different, and how they could put up with that, I don't know. Then he'd come out of the hay mowing the hay in the mow, And a lot of times I was sending up. I was big enough to do that, and then you thought you could drive the fork in and send it up. You're really doing something. That was pretty big business, you know. And he'd come down out of the mow, and we'd go in the house, and Haid with Hovlands a lot. Oscar and him would be up in the mow. And how they like to talk Norwegian between them, I can hear them yet. And he'd come in the house and he'd have hot coffee, boiling hot coffee, and then he'd sweat, and he'd say, "That drives the heat out," he always said. Claimed that was really good, you know. And maybe there was some truth to it, but he always said that was good. He wanted hot coffee. Today they want everything cold, just the opposite. Then they wanted hot coffee. And then when we got our first car, Dad took such interest in the car, he learned how to set the low bands up. And Ingwell Larson was an old relative of Mother's. Had a little garage in Sankirk, and he was a good mechanic, and he always kept Dad's car up for him. And they had a timer on him, and he carried a spare timer, and that would get dirty, and kept it tuned. And he took real good care of it. And Dad was a good driver. I never ever knew of him smashing a car in any way except the first Model T we had a lock on the steering wheel with a key. And we'd been playing in the car, and Irene says she thinks I did it, but she got the blame for it before he got into it, and it was in lock, the steering wheel. And he got in the car, going to start out right here by the trees where the squirrels are, going down the drive, and he took off, and he couldn't steer it, and he plowed right into that big tree that's, you know, part of it's missing, that big round one, and banged the radiator up and busted the headlight, if I remember right, and that was pretty serious business. But that's the only dent Dad ever put in a car, other than probably the back fender on the Model T. The one after that, he had a trailer and he hauled feed with that a lot, and if you cocked it off a little too hard backing up, you'd kind of catch the fender. And there were a few little wrinkles in the fender, I think, and maybe some of that I did. And that's what I learned to drive when I was about 9 years old. Out in the field, we'd be fencing with a trailer behind, hauling fence posts and stuff, and then I could press the pedal, you know, push the clutch on the left was the low band. That would start it out in the field. It was a great place to learn. So that's where I learned to drive a car. And I've always liked cars. Since a little kid I knew every model, because back in those days, or many years, you know, a car has changed every year just a little bit. And I knew every car by the year, just by the looks of it. Well, today, we'll have the same style for 4 or 5 years, and you can't tell that, and I miss it because I was really good at keeping track. And a lot of times now, when you talk about what year it was, I think what car a person had, and I could remember, I go back to the year by the looks of the car when you go way back. That's pretty common.
So,
but then, what?
No, go ahead.
Then after the Model T, I learned to drive that, and we had that several years, and that was a good one. It was the last year they made a Model T, and Julius Johnson bought it new, and he traded it for a Chevrolet, and we bought that car, and that was the last Model T they made, a 1927 model, I think it was. And it was a four-door Touring, but it was a good car, and it had good care. And we drove that for several years, and that's what I learned on. And then Conrad Gilbert's had the Plymouth agency in Sankirk, just a little deal out of the gas station. He was a sub-dealer under dealer in Eau Claire, Litchfield. No, it wasn't Litchfield, another name. And he traded with Hawken Hawkinson, and Hawken Hawkinson had a 1930, I believe it was, could be of 31 too, Chevrolet Londo they called it. And it would be a car today would have a vinyl top. It was a dark metallic green with black fenders and a black vinyl top with these chrome bows that come down behind the back window as a design like a convertible had, and they were beautiful. It was a beautiful car. And we got that, and now that was something. You had no, you didn't have hydraulic brakes yet, but it had a 3-speed shift on the floor and a clutch and a 6-cylinder and lots of power. And we bought that car, and we traded the Model T in, and I went home that night and I cried myself to sleep because I could just see that Model T, and I was so attached to it sitting down there all by itself like we abandoned it. So the next day we went down and bought it for $30. So then we had, I don't remember if Tom Prusick did it for us. I think so. Cut the back seat out and we made a little pickup out of it. So I had that for a few years. I used to go to the feed mill with that, haul feed with it, and that was kind of fun. We had that, but that Chevy was a real nice one. And man, about that time I started looking at girls a little bit, you know. I think I went even roller skating with that Chevrolet. Boy, that was some car. And I'd pick up Andy Loftus and some of these guys would ride me and they'd say, how fast will it go? And I said, I don't know. I never tried it out. I never believed in running a car wide open. Never could do that. And because I really took care of it. And I kept it waxed. And Dad used to make fun of me how I'd wax the car. I'd get the cloth would show the dead pigment on it. It'd be green on the cloth. And he'd say, you're wearing the paint out. He could never see that that was good for it, but he always picked on me that I was wearing the paint out. And of course, I'd put Simon eyes on, and I knew better, but you couldn't tell him that. He thought that just wearing the paint out. But I think down deep he was proud that I kept it looking nice. Then, pretty soon time goes on, and I start girling, and I had several different cars. I'd go to Milwaukee with Bunky and buy a car, come home and drive it a while and sell it.
But Dad, how did that kind of happen? How did you get the courage to start selling cars?
Well, Frank Prusick took a kind of a liking to me, and he was a lot older than me. And I was out of grade school at that time, on the farm, and it was awful tough going for Frank. He had airplanes and motorcycles and kind of went off the deep end a little, and then times got real tough, and he had to give up a lot of that stuff. And he didn't have any money, but I always had a little spending money, and he'd maybe take me along to Minneapolis, and we could go down on Washington Avenue or Hiawatha. We could buy 4 gallons for 50 cents gas. So I'd always fill his car up with gas, and he was always proud of that cheap gasoline we could get there. And traveled around a little bit, and then he went to work for Jones selling cars. Then he was at Bruce, and he married Bunn, and that's when he had airplanes, and he made some bad mistakes, and I think he lost everything he had. And in 1938 then, I hadn't started high school yet, maybe it was 37. He was going to go to California, and I took him to Minneapolis, and he answered an ad, and for $20 I think he got a ride to California in a car. And there were people that would haul people out there. They'd drive right straight through, maybe 5 people, and they'd get $20 a piece. And the gasoline was real cheap. And that's how he went out there and got this job with Fletcher School he went to, and went to work for Lockheed. And when he left, he set it up so I could go with Bunky, who was a used car jockey in Dallas, Mel Bunkard. And Mel took me along with him to Milwaukee, and I bought my first car was a Model A coupe, and I had that girl to that a while, and then sold it, and then I bought a different car, and kept on, I'd sell it, and I'd go back and buy another one with Mel. So I always went with him down there. We'd go down on North Avenue. We had a guy by the name of George Book that we'd give $10, I think, and he'd take us all around till he found us a car on North Avenue. Pick out a nice car for us, and Bunky'd buy one, I'd buy one. Once in a while Bunky bought 2, and we tow-barred home then. And that's how I got started in cars, and I always liked cars, always liked cars. And Grandpa didn't like that, and I'd come home and I'd make a good buck on them sometime. In fact, I made $200 on one I'm thinking of, and that was a lot of money in those days. Had it a while and sold it. And I'd want to get some money from Grandpa, and he'd say, you lose your shirt on the next one. And he didn't want to borrow me any money, because I didn't get any wages. I worked for nothing, just a little spending money. And finally then he was afraid that he'd say, you lose your shirt the next time. And I said, all right, if you don't want to give me any money, I'll go get it from Andrew. And that was my pry. Then he'd say, well, how much you need? He'd borrow me the money. So I'd go down again. And he never gave me any credit. He always would kind of say, you lose your shirt next time. He was afraid that I'd go too big and then go poof, So he was always protecting me, and I never knew that Grandpa cared for me like he did till I got quite older, up in my teens, because he never praised you for anything you did. But I can still go up to Myron's, him holding my hand, walking with him because I was so small. And we'd walk clear up there to see the Myrons on a Sunday. And I always felt good that you could hold your dad's hand. He looked like a big man, just a little feller. And we walked a shortcut through the pine woods, Followed the riverbank along there, and it was a big trip. But that was a great place to go, nothing better we wanted. And Mother always knew that. She never complained about us going to Myron's. You could always go up to Myron's. They had steam engine, they had a Titan tractor, and all that stuff. And we just had horses. But that's the way what it was like a lot. And then of course I had Harvey right next door. They had a radio then after Myron's not too long, and I used to go over there on Saturday nights and listen to Gangbusters.
That was a radio program, Dad?
That was a radio program, like robbery and stuff, you know, or some real stories they'd act out, I guess. And Gangbusters was an outfit that would catch the crooks, you know, and you sit there and listen to that airline radio with Fords. And they were good. They had no static. They had batteries galore running them, and you'd sit there listening to that. And then I'd go over and listen to Lum and Abner with Clara. She would just love to sit and listen to that. She could mock Lum and Abner, and she'd just laugh and stand there like this, you know, their hands on their hips, and could laugh with us and watch the radio or listen to the radio. In fact, when this thing was all over, I wound up with that radio, and I've got it in the garage. It's an airline radio, and I bought it for some reason when they went to electricity, I think, and I still have it. I don't know what a person could do with it, but it's just really quite a relic, because it's the first radio that I really went and listened to.
So Grandma would let you go over?
Yeah, I could go over to Norris. Oh yeah, and then I always had lunch. You know, they were always good to me. But I'd listen to Gangbusters, and then when I had to go home, I'd get so riled up, I'd run just as fast as I could home. I didn't dare look back, because you thought there was somebody coming right after you. You know, the old heart would just pound. I laugh about it now, but it was really real back then. Yeah, it was really scary, but that was a high spot.
When did you get electricity, Dad? Do you remember?
Yeah, we got electricity the fall that I started high school in Chautauqua, I think 1938.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, you'd stayed out of school. You graduated like from 8th grade. Is that right?
Yeah.
And then how long did you stay out of school?
4 years. 1934 I graduated in the spring, and then I went to, 1934 I graduated, and then I went back to school 4 years later. But the hardship years we had were 1933. That was the real drought year. That's when we had no pasture. And I went up to Ladysmith with Herman Hovland, Dad, and us, 3 farmers. Herman Hovland, Oscar, and us. And we took our cattle up on 27, just west of Ladysmith. We rented a farm that had a nice barn, and we stayed up there and had an old shack of a house that we lived in, and a lot of rats. I remember that. We had our beds around the floor and on mattresses, and we batched there. And all our job was to watch the cows and milk them morning and night. And then we'd ride to Ladysmith with a milk truck, and we'd walk back 5 miles down the railroad tracks. You know, have a few cents to get ice cream and stuff. And that was our big trip. And we had a big swimming pool, a good swimming pool in the Thornapple River right there that the cattle were pasturing in. So I was up there all summer, and that's the year that everything winter killed here. We had a rain in the spring that froze, and it killed the smartweed that used to be in the creek bottom years ago. I don't know if you ever remember seeing that. We don't have it now, but it would grow up thick with that, and it even killed that out. And in desperation, you could cut smartweed and let it dry out and feed it. They'd survive on it. But they didn't have any pasture here, and it wasn't a big area, but all over around here it was that way. And the farmers around here all took their cattle up north, rented places and pastured them for the summer.
So were you up there alone, Dad?
No, I was up there with Orville, or Kenneth Hovland,
right,
and Ed Austin was Herman's hired man. And then Grandpa Hovland and Herman, they'd come driving up that big Buick Herman had to check on us during the week. They're real good, come to see us and bring us groceries. But I was up there for the summer, most of the summer. Well, I was, yeah, sure, most of the summer. And when the fall of the year, then Dad was broke down, a nervous breakdown. And we had too many cows for the feed. They only had one bent on the barn of hay. It was a terrible summer. And we sold some cows, and I think we got $10 or $12 a piece for them. Great big Holsteins that had to go to market because they couldn't feed them. Well, then we got a government disaster federal loan. What did they call it? A feed loan, they called it. And Dad was broke down, so he couldn't work, but Oscar Hovland was the straw boss that managed the crew. And right up the road by Billy Berg's here on the Lover's Lane, they had a gravel pit. And the neighbors, we all were in the boots on this, you know, the Hanson Valley, everybody. And they gravelled that whole Hanson Valley road. We shoveled the gravel on by hand, and I was too young to be there, but because Oscar was the boss, they let me cover for Dad. And Fred Blakely was there, and he looked out for me always, didn't let the guys pick on me. He was always protecting me, kind of, because they'd pick on me a little. And we shoveled gravel
So this would have been like WPA.
Yeah, it was WPA is what it was, yeah. And we had the farmers, like the Hanson boys had a team, different ones had teams, and they had plank wagons that were narrow, the boxes this wide about. And the planks were cut out so they were this wide plank, and they were rounded so they kind of had a little handle like, see? You could grab it and lift it, and we'd fill these wagons up, and they'd go up and lift the boards and unload and then level it with a grader, and that's how he worked this loan off. And I did that because Dad wasn't able to be there. And that was my first year out of school. I did that, and so we saw some real hardships. And then we would try to cut grain. And it was so hot for the horses that they couldn't take it. They would cut late in the day and early in the morning, and there wasn't any dew. It was so dry. And then I suppose another year, Frank was, good to me then, and he was poor as could be too. He didn't have anything. And we went up to, we bought an international truck in Barron. It would have been Stocker's transfer truck, dray line truck that was peddling freight around town. It was a 4-cylinder engine with a Lycoming engine with a long piston stroke, and it had headlights on the side of it, on the cab, which was kind of outstanding for international. Nothing out in the front wobbling around. They were mounted right to the cab. And we bought that for a good price, and Frank took the thing and cut the frame off, and then we've got a big rear end from the county that we bought, a heavier rear end, and a different transmission. No, I think we used the same rear end, if I remember. I'm not sure. But different transmission, a 5-speed instead of a 3. It had a 3 to start with. And he made a bug tractor out of that, and it was a good one. I could plow 2 14s we had for it. And I had an 8-foot disc I pulled with it. And we were really living then. We had a starter and lights. And we could cut grain all day in the hot weather, and it never bothered the horses, didn't any of the horses. We'd cut corn bundle run the corn binder with it. And used it for hauling hay wagons. That was a bug. They always called that the bug. And we had it here for several years. We got done with it. Gerald Madison got it. And that was a real high point. They talk about the bug tractor yet. Then after that, when we got rid of that, Oscar, when he sold out down here, he had a GP John Deere, a 2-lunger. That was a pretty nice little tractor. And we bought that at his sale, I think. And then we bought his farm also, too. That was bought for me. And
which farm was that, Dad?
Where Frank, across the road from Frank. And then years later, when I bought Herman's farm, then I sold that to Frank, because he wanted to get you guys out of town and move to the country. So that was our first tractor, the GP after the bug. Well, then after that, during the war, then I got the Minneapolis Moline contract when Frank was still out in California. And we got the first R. Moline.
How did you decide to do that? How did that happen?
You know me. I went out to the plant, talked to the headquarters was in Hopkins, and I went.
How did you get the idea that you should do that? You'd been peddling cars at that point, right?
Yeah, I was peddling cars, and we had the gas station, and we bought that together, and I managed it, and Frank was in California, but I was still farming. I wouldn't leave the farm because I got deferred on the farm, so I stayed with the farm. And I went out to Minneapolis. I think I went right to the plant and talked to the head man, and they sent a field man out to see us, and he and I hit it off good, and they gave us the franchise. So that was the beginning, and we got quite a few pieces, quite a few tractors, Every so often you get one, and they were just like gold. But we got the very first one with headlights and starter. Boy, then we really farmed, and Grandpa loved that. He could cultivate with that. Man, he liked that. And he was a hand clutch, He always talked about a hand clutch. That was the real thing. So we was really living then, when he got something like that. And then in 1938, in the spring of 38, Irene had been going to Bible school, and she was through, I believe. I think she was going to Melbourne that it started maybe then. And I was sitting at the breakfast table, and the bus went by. And I said, boy, I'd sure like to go to high school. Because I never could have gone before, because I had to stay with the farm to keep it together. And in the meantime, before this happened, I got so disgusted with the farm because Gunda Lamo was Oscar's widow that we had for a partner after he died, and she was a real complainer and always wondering if she was being treated honestly, and just drove my dad up a tree because if anything got him, somebody was mistrusting, and she would probably knew better, but she always said things, to cutting things that would hurt him. And of course his brother had been such a saint that, you know, to get along with, they had such a great relationship. And he died of a ruptured appendix. No penicillin back in those days.
Dad, can you just take a minute to explain that, how the Lamos were connected with Grandpa Toycen?
Okay.
With Leonard?
Yeah. See, Grandpa's mother was Gustava. She was a Peterson, and her first husband's name was Lamo, and she had Calvin Lamo, and Dad's partner Oscar Lamo. Yeah, that's right. And then she had one other, Blickfeld. That was the other child. There were 3 Lamos.
Is that Wallace Lamo?
No, Wallace is no. Wallace was the son of Oscar. Oscar Lamo, yeah, that's right. So there were 3 children from the first husband. Then she married Lewis, and then had, I think, it was 12 altogether with both families. So
how had she met your Grandpa Toycen then, Lewis? How had that, had the Lamos lived in the area?
You know, that's a good question, because she was a Peterson, I'm sure, from Colfax area, but I don't know where they lived, really. And that I don't have. Paul would have that on the tree thing, I suppose. But what happened, Oscar, you see, Dad worked for his folks, and he worked in lumber camps, and when they moved to Colfax, nobody wanted to farm. Dermont wasn't interested in farming, parents wasn't interested in farming, and Sue was no farmer. And Oscar wanted to keep the farm in the family. And he said to Dad, he had a good job with the railroad, he had a very good job. He said, how about buying the home farm to keep it in the family? And Dad didn't have any money, and he'd worked for his dad that summer. So he got 4 horses from his dad as a gift for helping him farm the last year.
This had been from Lewis.
Yeah, and they wanted to move to Colfax. They built a new house in Colfax with lumber from the old 40, just like this house is. So Dad finally then agreed he would do it, and Oscar said he'd finance it. His half, he paid for his half, I suppose, quite fast. But Dad started with nothing, and then the times changed. It got pretty tough going. So as I was a kid, then after Dad had farmed, the first year he farmed, he'd signed a note for Dermont and parents. They bought a restaurant in Colfax. And they were good guys, but, you know, fishing and hunting came first. And they run a good restaurant, a big restaurant, but they were gone fishing and playing. And the next thing in the fall of the year, the Bank of Eau Claire came up, and Dad had signed a note for $500, I think, for him, and he had to make good. And I think he raised $200 himself, and he went to Sam Hubble and borrowed the other $3. And this took years. Every year I'd go with him at the first of the year at Christmas down to pay the interest, $15 on it. And Sam was so good to him. And of course I looked up to Sam like a grandpa. He was a real grandpa to me. That's why the tie is so close to the Hublins and us. It never changed. He was just a great person. And anyway, it took him years till finally he got that paid off. I was with him when he paid him the last $15, or the interest and the $300. Paid it back because the times got better. And finally, then with Gunda, I said to Dad, I'll stay on the farm and help you if you buy her out. If not, I'm not going to stay on the farm. This is before I went to high school. So Fritjof Knorr never asked. He told Dad, I'll give you the money to pay her off. So we had somebody come in and appraise it, and we bought it, I think, for $4,000 or $3,000. And the war came, and times changed real fast, and we paid for it in 1 year, which is unreal, you know. And I pushed that or else, and it was really a break for us. So that was a start. So things, when I wanted to go to high school, the farm was paid for, you know. And then I went to high school, and then of course after I started high school I had the Moline contract, and Frank and I had this other business, so you know it was going pretty good.
So Dad, just to clarify on the farm, what was the Lamo's name? The
Oscar.
he died, and so his
He
widow,
died in 1933
Okay,
or
and-
34.
and so his widow, in a sense, was Grandpa's partner.
Yeah, yes,
as a result
yes,
of the
yes.
death.
And she had a past. She'd come down on the train often, stay here several days, and kind of complain all the time how poor she was. And it was just rubbed us wrong. It wasn't. And then we had lots of church people that would come here, preachers and stuff would come and stay with us, and she was always finding fault with that. And it was a real tense thing. It really hurt me. And yet I liked her. She had so many good points too. She was still a nice person. In fact, by the way, I stopped to see her. I mean, not to see her, but her daughter, her only daughter, Alice. Just here a while ago, and I went to Billy Hickok's funeral. I said to Kenny Olson, if you don't mind, I just got to stop here. And I just pulled right off this, went right by the house on the way out. Rapped on the door, and she came to the door. Hi, Bruno. It's Bruno, she said. So I had a nice visit with her and talked about the reunion, but she wasn't too well. But I'd still like to take Paul and go up and see her, because there's fond, and she was a good gal. She still is directing a choir for 60 years. This is her last year, she said.
How old is she?
Oh, she's got to be 80. Yeah, she's got to be 80. But Uncle Oscar Lameau, and then of course his son Bud, you know, was real good guy. He was a newspaperman, and Wallace rode the freights when he was a kid. He was kind of a bum. And you saw that article about him when he was in Colfax, out of the paper that we cut out. You saw that, didn't you?
Yeah, I think so.
What'd they call him? He had Chink. Chink was his nickname. But he was just really brilliant, really an intelligent guy. And Dad always fussed over the Lameaus more than his own family. You know, they were really rated. And Wallace was really an intelligent guy. So there's wonderful memories of Uncle Oscar, but you know, it's just too bad that he wouldn't have had a ruptured appendix a few years later. They would have saved him, but he just went quick.
He wasn't an old man, right?
No, and then Dad broke down after that. That was Dad's breaking point. The tough going, and then he lost his brother he thought so much of. Didn't have a chance to see him. He just got word. And when we went to the funeral, I think we went to the funeral, Sam had a nice car, and Oscar took us to the Superior. So whenever there was something wrong, Sam always had something, came and helped, you know.
So
So-
I kind of got you off here.
Yeah.
We're talking about you going back to high school. You
Yeah.
said that morning you'd like to go.
To Irene. And Irene said to me, she said, you helped put me through Bible school. She said, I'll help put you through school. Well, in the meantime, romance started at Melbourne, so it didn't quite work that way. So then I went up to see E.L. Brown at Chautauqua if I could take it in 3 years. And he hired me to drive school bus. This was in the spring of the year.
At the same time.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That was a way for you to kind of pay your way.
Well, I hadn't planned on it, but it sure fit for me as much as I like to drive. So I drove bus for him the first year, but he never paid me. And I went to Milwaukee at Christmas, I think, or Thanksgiving, and bought cars, and I was jockeying cars. And had a Model A coupe with a rumble seat in the back, and had red wheels and a black car, and had a little cheap radio in it. And that was my first car. I think I even had a squirrel tail on the long antenna, like they did in those days. Yeah, that was my start of
So
school.
he didn't pay you. I mean, well, what was that all about?
Just poor manager,
Oh.
but he had a guy that was an idol to me, the ag guy that I worked with, recruiting kids for school, and I didn't say anything to him. But what made me switch, Colfax came to me and said, we got 3 new buses. We'll let you have your pick. 42 passengers, and they had a Ford, a Chevy, and a GMC. And the Chevy and GMC were gutless with the 6-cylinder. This Ford had a V8, so I took the Ford. Well, we had quite a bus. Then it was a 42 passenger with the back 2 seats out on each side. And I went to all the basketball games and football games because that was a bus they put all their equipment in there back there. So I got a lot of driving, and he paid me a lot more money. And he was a connivaler. He got me on CYF or something, an extra fund from the government, kind of like, not like welfare, but a subsidy or something. So I made around $45 a month, which is big money. So, and then the first year at Colfax, at Thanksgiving time, Frank had me go to, I went to Detroit, or to Lansing, Michigan, at Thanksgiving time, and got a new Oldsmobile torpedo for him. That was a slant back coupe. And kept it here from Thanksgiving till Christmas. And then at Christmas I left to go out there to deliver it to him, and Harley and John rode with me, and Agnes Waterhouse went with me.
And that was the first time you'd ever really gone anywhere like that?
Never had gone cross country like that. And then Margie Jinks was a friend of theirs, rode along, went out there, so we had a full load. We left here and we got to a place in Ames, Iowa, I think, and there was the Stance Quartet and some place in some revival church, and the Olsons had to stop there. We drove right through, and we took in that service and went out, and I'll never forget that. Oh, man. So then how did I come back from there? I'm trying to remember.
You would have been, what, 18 then, probably? Were you 18 yet?
Oh, no, I was 18 when I started high school. I was 19 then. 19 at least, 20 per there. But how did I get back from California that time? Because I went out once more when Elaine was in training in Chicago. That was after I was out of high school. And I rode back. Oh, no. Agnes stayed out there longer, and Frank got me a ride with a guy with a big Packard four-door, convertible four-door Touring. Advertised and got a ride back with him, and he was a newspaper reporter, and he'd been out there just partying, and he had some babe living with him in some big apartment, and he was all pooped out, so I had to drive most of the way back. I drove that big Packard car back, and we drove right through, yeah. So I come back that way. That was I did that during Christmas vacation. Delivered it out to Frank.
So when you went back to high school, Dad, did you have to pay for anything really? I mean, school was free, right?
Yeah.
So so it was just the fact that you couldn't be working the farm.
No.
So did you do the farm work as well then?
No, I managed it, but we had, for a hired man, we had Ed Austin, I believe, worked for us. And Dad was able, when he was feeling good enough, he was able to do quite a bit of it. But he broke down 2 years out of the 3 I was in high school. So it wasn't easy, but we made it go. I had a lot of determination and always had people that I could work with, kind of. And we had a bug tractor then, I suppose. I'm trying to think. Yeah.
In terms of the time frame then when you were in high school, when did you get the Minneapolis Moline farm implement contract? Was that during high school?
Let's see. We took the Moline contract. Yeah. I think I had a tractor. Sure. Yeah. Yeah, because Stanley Peterson, got hurt, and Dad used to take that R Moline and go up and cultivate for Eddie Peterson. Eddie talked about that till he died. I tell you, he said that what he could go, and people were like, Leonard came, he said, with that tractor and cultivated for me. He said, it just gave you courage, he said. I could hear him yet.
It's a bit of a digression, but since you've mentioned it, the story there, what happened to...
Oh, yeah, his son Stanley, that really would have went places. He was a daring person and a great guy. He could have been a real salesman to buy and sell. He was a persuasive person. He could sell, he could do anything. And he had those dancing wild eyes kind of, and he was a daredevil sort of. And he had a John Deere tractor, a GP, like the first one we had, and he had a long pole on the manure spreader, and he was spreading manure with it. And he jumped off the tractor, let the tractor go like I did a few times, and he ran back on the pole to pull it out of gear, and he slept off the pole and went underneath it. And it caught him. The beater beat him up and broke his back, cut his spinal cord. So he didn't go through the spreader, but he went underneath and got beat up that way, see? So he was paralyzed. So we all, thought the world of Eddie. He was a great neighbor, so people were awfully good to help, and that's where Dad went up to cultivate for Eddie, and he talked about that till his dying day, about how Leonard came up to help him.
What year did that happen, Dad? You remember?
Oh, I would say that was probably in about 19... I would think probably in about 1941 or 2. Yeah, maybe 42. Could have been 42 or 3 even. Because we'd had that tractor for a while. In fact, we had one and sold it and got another one a couple of years later, I think. Because you could always sell them, yeah.
Okay,
and then when I got done with school, I went to the draft board out of high school and I said to them, what do you want me to do? Do you want me to farm or go into service? And the war was getting at the end, and they said, we need you a lot more on the farm. So they deferred me then, because I wasn't and then I wouldn't leave the farm for 2 years. I kept on farming and still jockeying with Frank, but because he came back as soon as he could leave Lockheed, he wanted to come right back. He wanted to come back to a small town, so he took over and managed the station and did a bang-up job. You know, he was servicing cars and doing a good job. But he tires of things, and then pretty soon he got tired of selling, you know, 5 gallons of gas and wanting the oil checked and the tires aired. There was no money in it, and he wanted to sell cars. We had a used car license right away, but we moved, and we bought Ing's place, moved down there, and we took the pumps out, and then we had the Moline franchise, and then I got a new idea after that. So that worked out pretty well. But
and Frank, was he too old for the service, or was he deferred because of
he was deferred because of his job? Oh yeah, he had a deferment, no end. Yeah. Yeah, he would have been really high up with Lockheed if he'd have stayed with him, but he just wanted back to the country. He was just a country boy. Yet he loved California, many things about it, but he didn't like the big city and people. So he was very happy, and he bought his farm. He was so happy at that farm that was all that mattered. He just liked living on the farm, had to run away and stuff.
No, and was that his parents' farm originally?
No, Henry Hendrickson's.
Oh.
Harvey, he bought it from Harvey. Sure, you see, Harvey got the farm, and when he came back from service, then he sold it to Frank. Yeah, that was negotiated, went on for quite a while, and Frank was so thrilled over that you know, it just did me a lot of good. And he raised corn several years, and he paid for it just raising corn on it. That's the first time we had anybody raise corn on corn like he did, and he did real well. That whole machine shed where that was fixed for lumber on top, he elevated the corn up in there, and Bud Wagner used to come up and pick it for us. Picked his and picked Dad's, and he'd sell corn. Then we bought Sulphus. Then I started farming for myself up to Herman's, and then he had his ahead of me, I think, maybe, not sure. Yeah, I think he did. Well, then I bought Herman's farm, and then Sulphus was quitting because Harvey couldn't work anymore. He'd had that back surgery, so we bought his herd and split it. I took half, and he took half. Then I added cattle from Dad's herd. You know, so then Dad quit milking cows, and then I went full blast up there, and Frank did. And
when
Frank,
was that? Was that 50, what, 52?
Yeah, 51 I bought it, I think, and bought cattle in 52. I was in Bloomer.
Yep.
I was in Bloomer already when I needed a hired man, and we hired, I hired Jerry about in 53, I think, maybe 52. Yeah, Gene lined him up for a hired man for me.
Well, let's take a break, Dad. You've done really well. I think we should stop.
Yeah. I'm just trying to think of other stuff that I could have talked about. I never talked about our 40 across the river, how we used to go over there and cut wood, logs. Had a shack over there, and it had a stove in it. And that was about a 3-mile run back, and we'd come across the river with wood. We hauled our firewood from there every winter. Every winter we'd haul from across the river, bring it back, you know, when the ice got heavy. And then we sawed wood right out here. This is the wood piles out here, and Dad always had wood enough for a year and a half or so ahead. Good wood. Uncle Martin's, they often didn't, and they had burning green wood, and he thought that was terrible. Didn't have it ahead enough.
What, in terms of what that amounted to, Dad, when you went over to the 40, then were you cutting with like a big saw, or did he chop them down?
Cross cut, and he chopped with an axe. Dad could swing an axe so the wood would just fly. You know, he had sharp, everything sharp. He was very clever with his hands to do stuff. He wasn't a real mechanic, but he was a real organizer, could do things well. Yeah, I think of him a lot when I do things today, that, you know, the things he taught me, and the quality of honesty that he taught me, that I always look up to. So, you know, he always worried that if we can just pay for the farm, if we just won't lose it to you. And I had that pounded into me how serious that was, you know. If we could just make it.
What about Grandma in the middle of that then? How did she was more supportive of you?
Oh yeah, yeah. She always gave me the flowers. I can remember one time I said to Grandma, I'd like to work till I dropped to see if he'd say it was good. But I found out later years, the reason he did that, he was afraid he's going to spoil me if he praised me. He didn't know enough how to do that, where Grandma gave me all the praise, you know. And like Aunt Gertie said to me one time, you know, when this is afterwards, I was married and I stopped there, I used to bring stuff from the farm for her, and it was just fun to go there when I was done my shopping in the cities. And I was up there buying tires and stuff a lot in the cities, every week pretty near. But I'd swing by there on Arthur Avenue. And Gertie would sit down and she'd say, the men do the work, they got to eat, she'd say. And she'd just put all good stuff on the table and feed you. And That was really fun to go there. She was a great person. That was my favorite aunt, I'll tell you. Man, she was something. And Gertie was older than Mother, and she went to the city to work, where Mother just worked at the farmer's store in Sanctuary. That's as far as she got, and she started working there when just real young, out of grade school, you know. But she was so big for her age growing up. And Gertie went to the cities and worked for the rich people, kind of, we talked about. And Gertie could handle my mother. Whatever Gertie said, that was kind of law. Gertie made me my first little suit. She made it for me. Yeah. So I really got, you know, the relationship, the relations were really good to me, like the Danielson family, you know, Casper and Aunt Agnes. Oh man, they were good to me. But because I was so much younger, because Mother was youngest child, see. So it's, you know, they were really a fine family, and Aunt Martin and Cora were just great. You know, they were really close to those guys, because we spent so much time out there. We went up there to slide down the hills. They had the hills to slide, and Cora was a great cook. When we went up there, she always had lemon pie for Dad, because she knew he liked lemon pie. She was really something. It's just a crime that she couldn't live longer. You know, what a great person she was. She played the piano. She could give piano lessons. Very talented. And Uncle Martin, he was the preacher, and it was really great days, I tell you.
What about Uncle Tyre? Do you remember anything about him?
Oh yes.
Now this is Grandpa's brother, right?
Uncle Tyre used to come up, you know, quite often, and he always came up, and Grandma was so good to all these guys like that. Fed them just really great, and he came up, and he always had a scarf wound around him like that, and long, and it wasn't very clean, you know, but always had that around his neck, you know, kind of, yeah, a little like Sewell, you know. That's what, and he was so kind, such a kindness he had, and she was good to him. She fed him and stuff, and he was a guest, you know, like. And then when he got older and got cancer, she took him right up here, and he stayed in the little room where the bathroom used to be. Went to that room. That was a narrow little room, and they used to have chicks there when I was a kid. In the spring of the year, they'd start chicks in that room and then move them to the brooding house down there. And Grandpa would sleep with the chicks in the brooding house on a fire, hot as it was. He had a cot there with straw and a mattress from the straw stack, and he'd sleep with them the first few weeks to make sure everything was all right.
How did you keep it so warm?
We had to have it hot for chickens. About 80 some. Oh, sure. Yeah, I think he had a wood stove and a brooder, I think. Yeah, and that was a little kerosene burner or something, a little dangerous, you know. And he never took any chances. He was real careful. And that's where Uncle Tyre was, in that room. And I remember he had a big, must have been a tumor that broke here, and Grandma would dress that every day. Took care of him. And Dr. McCormick was a doctor, and when he died, he was getting real low. I think he was a fine Christian man. He was laying there, and George Toycen came and was going to spend the evening with him. That's what they did when somebody was low like that.
Toycen or Olson?
No, George Toycen.
Who is that? I don't know that name.
Well, George Toycen was right where Snort's post office is. They had a blacksmith, kind of a shop there, a stable, and he used to run the road patrol with horses, graded the road.
Was that Lewis's son?
No, Charlie's.
Oh, Charlie's.
He's the one that was such an intelligent man, but never married. Good ball player, but had wit like you can't believe. Oh man, he was sharp. And his brother Goodwin was in the World War I, and he was shell shot, gassed. And he was got to be an alcoholic when he came out. He did something to him. But he married a nice gal in Montana, and they adopted 2 little twin boys. And Goodwin was drinking, I think, and he ran into a tree and got killed. And
so he and his wife adopted 2 boys?
Yeah, they did. And she was a postmaster, or else he was. I think she was, in this little town. So when that happened, George went out there and never came back, and he wound up marrying her and raising those boys. And then when Dad and we sold the homestead in about 1930. I had a 46, 47, 40. Frank had a 46 Chevy Arrow. Yeah, 46 Chevy, 48 Chevy Arrow.
So that's how you're remembering the year.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
And I used that, and we drove out there to sell the homestead to this governor. We kept the oil rights.
You haven't sort of fully explained that, Dad. Grandpa homestead?
Grandpa went out there when he was single, before he came back and took the farm over.
That would have been what, in the 20s?
No, that was about 1917, I suppose,
right.
Way back in there. He went out west, and he had to stay there a year So he was able to homestead this land, and this thing on?
Yeah, it's on.
Yeah. He homesteaded this farm out of Havre at Guilford, and he had worked in logging camps, I think, a couple of years in the wintertime, British Columbia and up in northern Minnesota. And he homesteaded that, and he decided to come back. He said he was either gonna buy a motorcycle or farm. I don't remember which. It was a motorcycle was one thing, and he came back and bought the farm. Then he started going around. But she worked in the farmer's store.
Why did he come back? Has he ever talked about that? Because in some ways it seems like maybe coming back to the farm wasn't good for him.
Well, he said no. He said it was the hardest place he ever turned his back on, was to leave that prairie, Montana. He loved it out there.
Yeah.
But he came back, and then they talked him into taking over the farm, and of course, got married and was satisfied here. And I think it was probably the best thing that ever happened to him, because what would have happened to him if he broke down out there. But he had a girlfriend there, a Becky girl that he liked real well. And something happened to that romance, or he'd have married her probably. Mother talked about that. She was a nice girl, and she drove horses like a man. She was real handy at the farm. She could run a big gang plow with a bunch of horses.
When you say Becky, was that her last name?
Her last name was Becky, yeah.
Do you know how it was spelled?
No. So then he came back, and of course,
So that's the property. He kept his share of it.
Oh yeah, he kept that. So he rented it to this gummer.
Right.
And then we finally decided it was time to sell it maybe, and we sold it for about $4,000. So when we went out there to sell it, I had this car. We took Andrew Myron, Oscar Hovland, Dermont, see, Dad and I, Dermont, Andrew Myron, Oscar Hovland, I think there were 6. Might have been Herman too. Yes, I think it was Herman too. And we stopped to see George Toycen. He was in the hospital in Havre, in the Army hospital. I think he was dying of cancer of the throat. And we went to see him, and he was a guy that never cracked a smile, or never could shed a tear, you know. And I'll never forget, they talked to him, and when we said goodbye to him, the tears rolled down his face.
He was a very stoic man.
Oh yeah. But smart. Oh, he was smart. It's just a crime that, you know, things were as poor as they were, we didn't get to see more people. But that was a trip, and that's when Andrew was along, and Andrew sat right up by me, you know. We went around the mountains and the big drive. He would just lean over towards me like he didn't want to look down. So we traveled together, and then when he went to Montana that time to see took the Hovlands up there, you know, Andrew went with me. That's when he laid in the bed and they all went out someplace, and Andrew and I stayed in that day and talked about his farm, and he told me how he wanted me to have the farm when he was done with it. We just talked about, you know, his growing up, and they fought him on his romance, and he always talked about Adolph Swanson didn't amount to nothing, you know, because he wanted his wife, and he got jilted, and Adolph took over, you know, and he said...
Well, I hadn't heard that. I mean, Andrew had a romance, and...
Oh, with Helen Rathburn.
Oh.
Sure, he had a 36 Ford coach, and on Sunday afternoons he used to come up out on the road, and he'd toot the horn, and she had to come out to the road to meet him, and they'd go to Chautauqua to the show. And he'd have a little bag of chocolates, and he'd pick one out at a time and give her one at a time. Sure,
But his family was against it?
Oh, they fought something terrible.
Why do you think?
I don't know, it was so bad, they didn't want him to marry. It was so bad that he got mad and pulled out and went down. He got into a big row with Annie and his folks, and he went down and lived with Guy Jensen's for a whole winter. And we went down to see him, Dad and Oscar and I, to see him. And Andrew cried, you know, went to visit him because he missed him. And then finally he came back. He came back, and I guess when he came back, well, before that, you see, the boys had peed everything away with machines, and we're going to lose the farm when he came out of World War I. And he saved the farm then. Well, then this time he went down there, and Benny and Annie had a clean barn for the winter. But by spring, then they made up some way and got him back. And then after that, he was pretty much boss. I mean, Annie didn't push him around, although they fought his romance. That was terrible, because he really would like to have gotten married, and he would have made a wonderful husband for somebody. If he could have got somebody just, you know, not too high class, that could have led him a little bit and sharpened him up, it would have been good, because he was kind, not a mean bone in him. man, how good he was to you kids. You remember how good he was to all the kids? There wasn't another guy like him, you know.
What, were there any other of the Myrons that actually had romances like? Did Benny ever have a romance?
Yeah, Benny liked Alice Plummer. He would take her to the fair, but that's as far as it ever got.
So, and Alice Plummer, that would be Percy's
sister. She was a nice gal. She Huffmaster. She married a guy named Huffmaster, I think, that died, and she had a son with him. And she lived there with her folks.
And so, but Benny was kind of interested in her at one point.
Yeah, he took her, but he just didn't tend to things. But you'd see him when he cleaned up or came to the funeral, you wouldn't know him back. He was such a good-looking guy. Man, he was good-looking when he's clean, but he was always dirty otherwise, you know. Blacksmith dirt, black hands. He come to the table and put his hand down, everything he touched. He just black grease on it. I tell you, that's something, that whole family, of the characteristics of them, man. And of course, Oscar, that was the one that would come here to visit Dad, you know, come down to visit him, carry a lantern, come down. And he would never go home. He'd sit and talk all night, and Dad froze him out. He'd let the stove fire go out, and he'd put one foot up and then the other to warm it up, and he'd tell them about that. Oh, he was a great guy. And Frank Prusick thought the world of Oscar. He'd go up to see him, you know, when he had TB that time. He used to go up to see Oscar Myron.
Now, Oscar was their brother or their dad?
Oscar was the oldest boy.
Oh, he was the oldest brother.
Yeah, and they had steam engines and all that, radios, and he was the guy, the bug for that.
Right. Yeah, and the father, it was Ole?
Ole, a little short guy, and then Tootie was a big woman. Tootie was like...
She was big.
Oh yeah, Ole was shorter than Grandpa Toycen, and Tootie was big like Grandma. And he was the guy that would say, but he was so healthy and strong, he'd say, yeah, I guess I'll run to New Auburn for the mail, he'd say. After they did the milking at night. They had a path through, you know, they went to New Auburn, got the mail.
And is he the one who could go to Chippewa Falls and bring a load on his back?
A sack of flour. He'd bring a sack of flour, a sack of sugar from Chippewa Falls or Eau Claire, sure.
And do it in a day, go down there.
Oh yeah, oh sure. But New Auburn, you go up there after milking.
How long would those distances have been with the trails that they would have had?
Well, everything was pretty straight, but they went the ridges kind of, you know, they had trails in the ridges, I don't know. To New Auburn, it would have been a good 7 miles from his place, probably closer to 8.
And Chippewa Falls would have still been, what, 20 miles?
Oh yeah, 25.
Yeah, 25 miles.
At least. Sure.
And he had kind of a running gait, is that
Yeah, he never walked, he trotted. Yeah. And he would have lived a lot longer, but he got pneumonia, and they gave him so much sulfa. They killed him with sulfa, I think. Doctors were pretty careless that way back then. And he died in 1935. Because I can remember the car Clarence Hovland had that Andrew borrowed for the funeral. I was there. And he was chopping wood. He'd been chopping wood and got sweaty. They had a big pile of wood in front of the house, and he did all the chopping of wood, and he milked cows morning and night. Started milking at about 5, 6 years old. He milked cows all his life till he died. And you know, you went to the Myrons, you know, there was a death in the family. You never saw any weeping and stuff around, you know. Well, life went right on the next day. You know, they never mopped around, felt sorry for themselves. Unreal. And just think, Grandma and I went over there when Annie died, you know. She died right, I can see her laying on the bed of the big 8-inch top boots that she had milking cows with her overalls on.
Did she have a heart attack?
Yeah.
She died in bed?
She wasn't feeling good. She lay down in the bed and died right there. I don't think we had to pick her up and put her in the bed. I don't remember. But Mother got called and we went right over there. Yeah.
She died with her boots on?
Yeah, absolutely. But just think, back in those days, Mother was a community nurse. Edgar Johnson's, I remember when the phone rang and she'd go to give them hypos, you know, and wherever there was a problem. Now there's quite a few around, but she was the only one back then, you know. Never thought anything of it, just ready to go.
Well, Dad, I think we got to quit.
Yeah,
We're not out of tape. You're not out of talk, but I'm out of time.
No, I could go on. You get me going on this. We could do some more some other time. I'll think about some things I'd like to tell you. But like going out to 40, there was an owl over there would hoot at night. You know, starting the sun start going down, and we'd have to take off for home. Man, it seemed like a long trip way back in there, you know. But we had that little shack we fired up, and that was really cozy. And Dad just loved it, you know. Oh man, he just talked about that 40. Yeah. Oscar Hovland had the saw rig. Sawed his thumb off. We were kids.
He lost it, right?
Had a stub thumb.
Well, we got to stop.
Okay.
Why don't do you want to go up and get that?
Okay, this is something that I'd like to touch on. We had services in the homes. And then we started a Sunday school over in Springbrook School, and Cora was the superintendent. And the Waterhouse kids came, Agnes's, Bill Waterhouse's kids, and Bob McCarty's kids. They were a fine family. The Sunleys. It was pretty big. And Grandma Sparby and the kids came, Elaine, Dodo, Orwin was a little feller with a sailor suit. And we started that over there. McDonald's came. Who else came? Oh, Peterson. He died real early in age. He was really a smart kid. His mother was a widow, and Uncle Freddie was kind of sweet on her. They lived right next to Waterhouses. She was a pretty lady. Anyway, that's where we had Sunday school, in that schoolhouse, for several years. Well, then, Ingo Larson had left, so that garage was for sale, to rent, I think. And we rented it from a lady by the name of Fletcher from Madison or plant somewhere that owned it. And I don't think we ever bought it, but we might have.
Where was this?
In Sand Creek, right for the Hughes's blacksmith shop.
Right.
So we fixed it up. Grandpa cut it off in the middle. You know, the south half was the warmest. And he was great with sawdust was available. And we boarded it up, you know, with laths and filled it with sawdust to warm it up. And we had a stove in there, you know, good big stove. And I used to go down and fire that up. And then we had it petitioned off. You'd go in there. So we had services there on sawdust floor on top of the cement, you know. And that's where the Waterhouse boys got up above, and I think Leighton come right through the ceiling. He had a false ceiling, you know, with sawdust and stuff to keep it warm. He fell through, come bang right down, wish. But they came to church there, and that was our start. We called it what did we call it? The little tabernacle, I think it was. And we went to church there for quite a few years. Well, then we got the church from Pine Creek, the old church that Julius Highland had, because he came to our services. That petered out up there. He came to our services, and then he gave us the old church, the chapel that we started with, that turned into a house.
That you moved.
We moved that from Pine Creek, and we had that. See? Then we started in the basement, then we made that into an apartment house. So that was our history, but then everybody moved away. Well, we had a band. Harley played a trombone, and I don't remember what John played, trumpet, and Dolores had instruments. Frank played a cornet, I believe. No, I think he played a clarinet, I believe.
Frank Prusick.
So, a saxophone. He played a saxophone, sure. Then we had Bible students that would come out. Had a group that would come out. A fellow named Patch, a bachelor that was very gifted, had a good job with one of the big companies in Minneapolis. And that's how we met the Salinas girls. They came out and put on a service for us. They'd come out for Sunday morning or afternoon and evening, I think it was. You know, they'd come out. And it started like that. That's in the old garage. Oh, he had some real talent. Novak was a great guy that had been a dance band player and had played a saxophone. Man, he was gifted. He was good. Just some great days.
Okay, got to stop.
All right, we'll quit.
Dad, you were earlier talking about a story when you were a boy that I don't think we got the first time around.
No, I never thought of it since then. It just hit me today. I don't know why. I must be supposed to do it. When I was a little boy, I used to bring lunch out to Dad. And we had 4 horses and a gang plow. That's 2 bottom that you rode on. And most of the neighbors all had walking plows. Once in a while they'd have a sulky, and then they'd have 3 horses and the guy would be riding, and I always thought it was so great to be able to ride. So I'd come up with lunch to Dad, and he'd always wanted to coax me to ride with him so he could talk, and he liked to talk like I do. He talked pretty much steady. And I was riding with him on this gang plow right across the road from where we live, about not quite halfway to the cemetery, and there's a kind of a sandy knoll there. and he was plowing going east and west, and I can remember it like yesterday. We were going east, and I don't know if it was Ginger. I can't remember what horse it was, but it was a heavy horse, and it dropped dead right on the plow. And I got so scared I ran home. Anyway, then the horse died right on the sandy knoll there, and I remember Oscar Hovland came over and they dug a big hole and buried her right on the spot.
Right in the field.
Right in the field where it died, yeah. And that was really a tragedy to me. I thought that was just terrible. That horse dropped dead. I was sitting on Grandpa's lap riding in the plow. So
Dad, in terms of that farm and where it was, there's a kind of swamp area with big trees growing up.
Yeah.
It's just what?
Just
west of that?
Just west of that, and a little bit north.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
It was just, I'll never forget that. It just dropped dead right now.
Right.
So I ran home. He couldn't stop me.
Dad, something I was thinking about when we did the previous part one, something that just struck me. We didn't really ask you at all about any sort of public events, big events that you can remember, like politics or big events in the country. Does anything come to your mind, stand out when you were a boy?
Yeah,
Something that was really memorable, that was historical?
Well, see, we only had a Model T, and we didn't go very far. To go to Menominee was a big trip, or
Right.
Colfax, that was about.
Did you have, let's see, you would have had radio then, I suppose? Yeah.
Well, we were one of the last to get a radio. We had earphones at first. Oscar Myron came down and put that into the whole bunch of AC and D batteries and stuff. It was a contraption, and they didn't work the best. And we weren't that radio minded. Dad wasn't really.
So did you get a newspaper? Did you get newspaper?
Oh yeah, they had the newspaper. I think
Grandpa
Superior
would've-
Telegram. Uncle Oscar Lameau was up there, and we never had an Eau Claire Leader. We had the Superior Telegram. That was the paper, because Uncle Oscar was up there, and it was a good paper.
Right.
Evening Telegram, they called it. We had that.
So, I mean, do you remember like the election of a president or
Oh
the death
yes.
of a president? Or
Yeah, I
what's
can
the
remember
first one?
Hoover's days. I was in grade school going to school, and I can remember the Babe Ruth candy bars and the picture Edgar Hoover badges and stuff you could get, a little
Or
trinket.
FBI?
The FBI and all that stuff, yeah. And I'm trying to think who else. Well, I remember the buttons at election time, Coolidge.
Right.
Grandpa was a Republican, so I always got the buttons, that he liked, and they were pretty simple, but you pinned them on and wore them.
How had Grandpa become a Republican, do you think?
Because Uncle Oscar was.
Oh, this was the...
Whatever Uncle Oscar, his half-brother, said or did, that was law.
This was
Dad.
Oscar Lameau.
Yeah.
Okay.
He was such a smart man, we thought, and so balanced that whatever he thought, Grandpa was in harmony. They were just really, really thought a lot of each other. He would.
And were a lot of people Republicans in the area or not? I suppose it was...
Oh, yeah, there were, but I think a lot of Democrats. When times got tough, then there were a lot of Democrats. Yeah. So it might have been 50-50. I really don't know.
Right.
Because, politics didn't interest me that much. I listened, and heard them say, and yeah, I think that's about it. Pretty close. I wouldn't know. I could ask somebody older, but I don't have Andrew anymore to ask.
Right.
And
were there any times where, well, like the farmers kind of got uppity because of the Depression or that sort of thing?
Yeah.
Political
Oh my
organization?
goodness, yes. Well, when I was real young, one of the big things that they started the Farmers Union, and Arnold Gilberts was real instrumental in that. And they'd have Farmers Union meetings, and Tom Umtwite's mother was pretty active in that. She could get up and talk about the Farmers Union, and a lot of the people, the Gilbertses, are all strong Farmers Union, and some of them around our area, but the Hansons and that, I don't know if they were so much. But Dad was never a Farmers Union man because he had a kind of a bad experience. They bought a carload of wheat, some government cheap stuff in the Depression days, and I don't remember how many farmers went with him, and then it was moldy or something wasn't right, and they kind of dumped him. And Dad and I think Fred Blakely realized what they did, and he stood by him kind of, so he kind of got stuck with it. We used it for chickens, and he just didn't have much use because the people didn't stick together. So he was never strong for that, but I belonged to the Farmers Union, but I don't think Dad ever did. But in later years when I was farming, I joined the Farmers Union because of the feed mill. So, but Dad was not really a co-op-minded person.
What about in Wisconsin, the independent movement under Robert La Follette? And do you remember that at all?
Yes, I remember that. Yeah, I remember that. And of course, I would think, and I'm not sure on this day, but I would think that Dan probably thought it was a little radical. Because Dad was really conservative, you know, and careful. And I think that was the way it was. But back to any other things, well, the holiday movement came in, you know, in the tough times, and they dumped milk, they killed pigs supposed to, but we didn't around our place. And I know Dad didn't like that, thought it was wasting, you know, sin to do that. And Arnold Gilbert was down in Madison. He was a ringleader up in our country on that. And man, they got mad at him. I don't know what he did wrong or what. And he was denned up in a hotel, didn't dare to come out. I know that. And then after that binge of stuff, it kind of cooled off. And then Roosevelt got in. And he came up with programs to help the farmers, feed loans and all that stuff, and it was a turning point. I mean, it was, you know, we got into a war over it, but before that, I can remember when I came out of grade school, Grandpa had his first nervous breakdown, I think, about the time I got out of grade school, because Uncle Oscar died in '34, I believe, and that was too tough for Grandpa. And he'd been up at Garfield Ness's fighting fire. He knew he was on a granary trying to save the building, and he got overheated, and we always blamed it to that. And he broke down with his first nervous breakdown, and he couldn't go and work on the road. We had a feed loan. We got feed from the government, and we had to work it back on WPA. And WPA for us was the farmers had a team of horses and a wagon and planks that were rounded on the end, so you could load a load of gravel, and you could get to the destination, one guy on each end, grab them and twist them and unload right down through the wheels. And they graveled the Hanson Valley Road, and they took the gravel right on the Bennett Eddy, you know, that pit in Billy Berg's. And I was old enough, and I wasn't legal, but Oscar Hovland was the crew manager, and they let me go and take Dad's place, and I pitched gravel. And I can remember Kenny Nelson was there working off alone, and all the different neighbors.
How old were you at that point?
14.
14.
Yeah, and I shoveled gravel, and Fred Blakely was there.
How much did you get? Was it a day, a week, or how did they pay you?
Oh, no, no, he didn't pay us nothing. He was working off alone.
Oh, you're working on
Yeah.
Right.
And then the guys with nice horses, they were hauling gravel, like Andrew Hansen hauled gravel, and different ones had horses on, and we'd load the wagons, pitching it by hand. And I can remember how Fred Blakely always watched out for me. He was really good to me, you know, so the guys couldn't pick on me. And Kenny Nelson was older than I was, and he had a terrific appetite. He'd have a gallon pail just full of sandwiches, and he could eat like a horse. He was there. And I can't remember the Hovland boys, if anybody worked there. I don't suppose they did. It seemed like Orville was there with me, or Kenneth. I'm just not sure. And Harvey Austin wasn't there, I don't think. I should remember that, but Norman Anderson and Gerald Madison, they had the lawns, they helped. I don't remember if it was Alfred or not. And the Myrons didn't get in on that. They didn't go for it, I guess. The Norboys, I don't think, did. But the Hanson Valley did. Mm-hmm. And
so that was for what, one summer or over a period of time?
In the fall of the year they were doing that, yeah. And I don't know, I suppose they paid him fairly well. And then we got some hay. Hay was real short. That bad year, then I went up with the cattle to Ladysmith. We had the drought. Have we ever talked about that before?
I think he talked about it in the last
I went up there, and when we came back in the fall, we had no hay. Just in the green, the corn we cut, we had corn on Stubbins across from Swanhill. Oscar and us, and we cut it with a grain binder. It was about this high. And we got enough to fill the abutment in our silo. You know, that's about 8 feet down in the ground. Mm-hmm. That's all the silage we had. And then we had hail on top of it that knocked the corn, and got big smut on it and stuff. And we went with a big butcher knife and slashed the smut off because they thought it was poisonous before they cut it. So that was a tough year, and we got some hay through the government, some good hay for the horses. That was a feed loan too, kind of shipped in. And you know, when things get tough, it gets tough the other way to bring it in. It's just the arm and a leg. And in the spring of the year, I think this was probably in '35, after this terrible going, Fritjof Knorr offered my dad money to buy a team of horses, and we bought a beautiful black team of horses from Carl Esposset. And that's when I started plowing 70 acres 2 falls in a row with a walking plow. Because Dad had quit the gang plow because we couldn't afford to feed 4 horses because it had to have milk cows.
It took 4 horses to pull that?
Yeah, it took 4 to pull a 2 bottom. So we just had a 14-inch that I walked behind, and that was some of the best days of my life. You know, so you saw the birds, the ducks and stuff in the fall, and Harvey Austin would be plowing, and we'd meet at the fences, or Norman Anderson, and we'd talk and rest our horses, and you know, I had time to see and do things. Saw the jackrabbits, always kept track of them. We had big jackrabbits back then.
Well, but you'd had 4 horses before, so what? That one obviously died.
Yeah, I never plowed with 4 horses. Maybe, I don't think, we didn't have that many. So we went down to...
Did you lose those?
Huh?
Did you lose those that you had to buy a new team, or they just got old?
Yeah, they just got old. And so we bought 2 black horses, that's all we had. And we did everything with that. But then, you see, Frank built that old bug tractor, and we used that on the grain binder and the corn binder, and that saved our neck, so we didn't have to have more than the 2 horses. And could do everything with that. But we still raked hay with the horses and stuff like that. And had a hay loader, and the bug tractor pulled that wagon. So we really got farming when I got that. That was really something. Then we had a 214 plow that we pulled with it, real good, and a disc. And that was, and then we could put it on the grain binder, run it in 90-degree weather. It didn't get tired. We even helped Andrew across the river. We'd cut grain for him, Dad and I. And Dad loved to sit on the binder and run the binder, and I drove the tractor. Sit there shaking all day. That thing, steel wheels. Yeah, those are days, I'll tell you, that you never forget. I mean, you treasure it because it was, it's something about it. I never felt sorry for ourselves. I just thought we really were living, really were living. Then after the bug tractor, we got a GP John Deere that Oscar Hovland had when he sold his farm. We bought that at his auction. And that was a little bit bigger and more traction. Right. Worked out better for us. And you turn the crank, the 5-wheel, you give that a kick and she'd start off and pop, 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 it'd go, you know. And the harder it worked, it would just kind of jump up and down the hood down, and she labored good, you know, and boy, we really were living then. And of course then time went on, and, you know, when we got our Moline contract, and we got the first tractor. I think we've talked about that, haven't we?
Yeah. Well, no, I think where we left off is I think you were about 18 years old.
Yeah.
And you were starting to buy cars, and you had been driving the school bus. And
yeah, I went with Bunky down to Milwaukee to buy cars and bring back. Do that a couple times a year, and then I'd sell them again. Yeah, right. Yeah, yeah.
So, Dad, once you graduated from high school, let's see, no, you were probably going to high school. When did you sort of start then your first business outside of selling cars? Where you actually got involved in business?
Well, when Frank went to California, I took him to Minneapolis. And he went up, I took him up there, and then he got a ride for $20 with people who would take passengers to California.
This is Frank Prusick.
Yeah. And he told me before he left, he said, I want to go in business with you someday. So while he was gone, then of course I kept in touch with him because he was kind of an idol to me, and he was very good.
And he was a little bit older, right?
Yes, yes. Frank was about 6 or 7 years older. And must have liked me. And he knew I was honest, and you know, the way we were brought up, went to church together and stuff. We had a lot in common. And when he was out in California, Conrad was running Home Oil, and Omer Loftus worked for him. And I think Omer Loftus left him and went farming at Colfax, if I'm not mistaken. I could have that wrong. It could have been later, to get out of the service. He rented a Frogner farm, Norma's dad's farm. He was a mail carrier and had a farm. And Conrad was desperate to sell his business. Of course, he couldn't get new cars anymore. He got Chryslers through a dealer in Eau Claire in Plymouth. And he was so desperate to sell, and of course Frank talked to him and thought that'd be a good thing to buy, so we bought it from real reasonable.
So this is Home Oil, the gas station.
And I was going to high school then.
Right.
See? And so I managed it and worked there like on weekends and stuff. And then we had...
Frank was still in California?
Oh, yes. We had this Home Oil for a couple of years.
So how did you come up with the money?
Well, Frank had the money. I mean, I don't think I came up with much of anything, but, you know, I got there later because I didn't have it. But he had the down payment, a couple $1,000s or whatever. It wasn't a lot of money for it. And Conrad just wanted to get out of it. And then Omer was gone to Colfax, and Jim Bracken managed it when he first bought it. He ran it, but he never stuck to anything too long, and he went to do something.
And were you at that point still working on the farm?
Oh,
you still
yeah.
had the farm to run.
Yeah.
Plus you were peddling some cars.
No, I wasn't peddling that much cars, just one now and then. You know, what I drive was for sale. But I was driving school bus.
Right. And you were still in school, right?
Yeah, I was still in school. So when school was out, I went to the draft board and I said, what do you want me to do? Go in the service? Or do you want me to farm? And Goodrich was the name of the chairman of the board. He had the Goodrich furniture store in Hope Menominee, and he said, we need you a lot more on the farm. Cause,
this is the draft board.
Yeah, and they knew my dad had nervous breakdowns and he couldn't keep on if I didn't stay, so they encouraged me to stay on the farm, and they deferred me. And when I was deferred on the farm, when Frank came back, then the minute Lockheed, the war was over, he just left and wanted to come back to Wisconsin. And then I just wouldn't leave. I wasn't going to jump off the farm. I stayed on the farm for I think 2 years, but he was running the gas station to start with, and did a real good job. And then Omer came back, I believe, and worked for us. But maybe not then, but I had Omer back there because he quit farming then, and I think he came back and worked for us. And then Frank came back, and seemed like it wasn't long after Frank was back, Omer was gone, and then he hired different guys to come in and help us, and then finally Oscar Hovland came, and that worked out quite well. He was with us. And then Ing Hansen had his place for sale, and of course we didn't care about him, and we couldn't deal with him, we didn't think, so Dwayne Abrahamson bought it and then for us. So then we sold the station to Oscar in Orville, and
Hovland.
yeah, Frank, we spent too much time peddling gasoline and airing tires and stuff. There's no money in it. You know, you come in and get 4 gallons of gas with a OPS card, and want their cars gas checked and or the oil checked and air the tires and fill the battery with water. And then Frank saw there was no money in that, so he wanted to get busy selling used cars. And in the meantime, while he was gone, I got the Moline franchise. I handled that. That was easy.
You did that on the gas as well?
Well, yeah, we had girls coming in and tractor, we got the Moline, Frank, we should have that. And that was just really something, self-starter and lights. Then I could really farm. And then I was out of school, so I was farming. And
so when would this have been, Dad? You graduated then from high school?
42.
42?
Mm-hmm. So probably...
So the war was still on then.
Oh yeah, but by 44 it was over, I think, or something. So, so I kept right on farming, and Omer. Then it seemed like Omer was running it for us before Oscar. I'm not sure. I can't remember that right down to the T. But anyway, we wound up selling it to Oscar, and Omer went west, see, to Seattle, and sold it to Oscar. And then we had Ing's place, and that's what Frank wanted, so we could just put machinery together. And then we jockeyed in cars and fixed the basement up, put cement in that, and we could put 4 new cars in there, and we'd buy cars up and put them down in the basement, and then we'd get a deal, we'd sell them, and worked hard in the summer. In the wintertime there wasn't too much to do, you know, but we made 10 grand a piece for the year, and that was big money back then. And
where was the basement you're talking about?
under the garage.
Not Home Oil, the other,
No,
the later one.
Ing's, yeah.
Okay. Dad, just I'm going to stop for a minute. Okay, so so you sold the gas station to the Hovlands. You then bought the corner thing from Ing Hansen, the corner property there. Let's see, what you call them, auto sales, right?
Yeah, but before that we bought Oscar Hovland's farm. I think for $2,500, if I'm not mistaken.
And that's
or
the farm
$3,000.
that Frank is on.
Well, Frank, yeah, we sold Frank. We sold all of that. See, when I got Herman's farm, then we sold that to Frank for what we paid for it.
Okay. So you actually had a piece of the Prusick farm. I mean, together.
Oh yeah, sure. And Frank liked farming so well, and getting Herman's farm, that was so great. Didn't think we needed it, so I let it go. But it kind of probably should have stayed with a home farm, because you could have farmed a pretty near a mile long there. It would have been kind of nice, but it's all right. It worked out, and Frank was real happy to have it. So.
Right. Okay, so the one thing we've forgotten is, has Mom entered the scene yet? When did you start dating Mom?
Oh, I started going with her about in...
You were still in high school?
Well, wait a minute. When did we get married? We got married in 45.
Right.
I went with her about 1.5 years.
Okay.
Yeah, so I started dating her, I suppose, in 44.
And how did that happen?
Well, I always liked her. You know, she was somebody real special to me. And when her dad didn't have much of a car, I remember the back window was out of it. And we were such good pals that I always thought she was too tall for me, but she bothered me. I liked her. But I had another girl for 3 years, and that broke up, see? And she was some guy was a little faster guy than me that was a great dancer and played accordion, milk collar, flirting with her, and so she went for that, and that was fine. We broke up, and it was hard on both of us, but we you know, I just felt it was for the best, and because I never felt I should marry her. She wanted to get married. So anyway, when Elaine went down to take her test for the Luther Hospital.
This was to be admitted as a student?
Yeah, well, it was a startup, a test like, and they didn't have a car, and I suppose we were friends enough, and I offered to take her down there. But we weren't going together, but I took her down to Luther, and I remember we went to Bloomer. I should tell you this. You remember little Henry we talked about, her uncle that was so short?
Yes.
Well, he worked for Harry Hansen south of Bloomer on Q. Harry was a good farmer, and H. Robert, his son, now is farming, and then Peter, his son. They're good people, customers of ours. And Harry was always nice to me. I sold him his cars. And we stopped there because he was going to give Elaine $300 for her tuition. And they were milking cows. And I can see that guy come out and with his bib overall, and we always called him Little Henry from home. He had a milk route when he was on.
Was he little?
Oh yeah, he was only probably about 4.5 feet tall, I think.
Really?
Yeah, yeah. But built good, little short arms. And he came out of the barn and he flipped his bid open like that, and he peeled out $300 and handed it to her. And that was her start, see? Then she went down. And I don't know if that was at first or not, but I took her down for her exam or whatever she went through to get it in there. Then when she went down there, I took her down again to go down to stay. And she was a nurse's training, and I don't know how it happened. And no.
You just took her down as a favor, or were you kind of...
No, I wasn't dating her, no, just as a favor, just good friends.
Yeah.
We were just friends. I always thought she was like a sister to me, you know. And then I suppose I was getting kind of lonely, and I roller skated, you know, and Ruby was roller skating, and Lloyd, they were going together, and I'd gotten introduced them. I was pretty proud of Lloyd. He was a fine guy, and Ruby was real good. And I used to pick up Vernoid and the different ones. We'd go to the Pines to skate. And finally, I don't know how it happened, but I must have called her up and asked for a date. And by the way, after I broke up with Wanda, I sold the car I had, and I bought Frank came back from out west in May, I think it was, or maybe, yeah, I think it was in May or June. And he said, when I come back, we'll go out and buy a car each. And he liked to do that, so we went to Minneapolis, and he was going to try and buy a Buick convertible. He'd had one and sold it out west, and we were going to buy one to go back with. And he said, I think you ought to have a convertible. So we went to a downtown Chevrolet, was on East Hennepin, down from main part of Minneapolis. And went up there looking, and OPS was on, and they had a...
What's OPS?
OPS was a control the price of everything.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Right. During the war.
Yeah, OPS was on, and maybe it wasn't on yet then. I don't think it was on yet, but it came on. And we went upstairs where they had cars for sale, and the Chevrolet dealer's wife had this. It was a 1941 Chevrolet convertible, a metallic green with a white top, leather seats, and it just smelled strong leather, green leather. Oh, it was beautiful. And I bought that for $1,495. But Frank couldn't find a convertible, so he didn't get one. So we came back with it, and I'll never forget, we were at Frank's mother's house, and he took all the chrome off inside it. When you folded the top down, there was all bows of chrome, you know. Really was beautiful. Chrome up around the windows, and oh, that was decked out. It was a gorgeous car. Took all of that off and polished it. Had that thing looking just like new. And so that was my girling car then, and of course I think I went, oh yeah, and what I did, that's right, I called Elaine for a date. And I came down to get her, and she worked in nursing there, and I remember for the nurses stayed.
So she was at Luther at this point?
Yeah, she was in training, and it was a Sunday afternoon, and she said, "Put the top down, put the top down." And I was so conscious of the war, I didn't hardly want to do it. I had trouble doing it. I felt so guilty, deferred. And here I'm driving a convertible, didn't want to show off, but I did. So I don't know if that was the first time. I can't tell you for sure, but anyway, it was the first date I had with her, and I asked her for another date. And she said she'd see. Playing hard to get, you know. And I was afraid of her because she never went with anybody a little while. She never wanted to go steady with anybody or whatever. And a lot of people liked her and wanted to date her, but she'd just go out once or so, and that was it. So I got a letter. A couple, 2, 3 days, come on down. I went down, and that was it. We never had a problem. We went together till we were married. And I had the car. I had the car about a year. And Arnie Loftus was a Ford dealer in Colfax and promised me the second Ford he got, I think. And I knew that was going to go. And Jake Seif was a kike from the city, a Jew that bought cars that paid through the nose. And I sold it to him for $1,500, and I drove it a year and put probably 25,000 miles on it, and thought it was a smart thing to do because I knew I had this Ford coming. And he sent it to California and it got wrecked on the way out. Somebody smashed it up driving it out there. Anyway, I heard that and felt bad about that. But then it wasn't long and I got a new Ford from Arnie, a new Club Coupe. Kind of short, you know, like the, and it was black. And man, it wasn't expensive. I don't think it was $1,000. You know, it was a lot cheaper than the other car. So we drove that. We had that when we no, we didn't. Let me think. I got that after we were married. I got that from him after we were married. Yeah, because I sold the other car before we were married, and then after that, I was friends with Corky McDonald through Frank, and nosing around, and I bought a 36 Ford right out of Bloomer, north of Bloomer, that first little farm there. These people had, it was a 4-door 36 Ford that had 10 or 11,000 miles on it. And I paid them big bucks for it, you know, and they sold it to me. And this is when we were going together. Well, we got married, I think, when I had this. Yeah, we got married. And I drove this, and then I remember going, we were married, and I'd go to Eau Claire to see her, spend a night down there because she couldn't come home, and I was working the farm, and Dad is poorly, so I milking cows morning and night. So I'd go down there and leave in the morning early enough to get home and milk cows. And I drove this Ford, and then when we got married, we were married, when we were going to go on our honeymoon, yeah, I sold this before that. When we were going to go on our honeymoon after we got married, I took this Ford to Minneapolis, was going to go to California with it, and I went over to Moline to see the guys there, because they were friends of ours, and Frank and I used to bring them pork and stuff at the end of when he had pigs at his place, and give it to him, you know, and man, they gave his machinery, just buttered everybody up. Big fellow by the name of Nash, and Bennett was a general manager. We were real friends with them guys. Went fishing with them, they went fishing with us on a fishing trip up to Hayward once. And I went up there, and we stayed at the Curtis Hotel. After we got married, we drove in and stayed at the Curtis Hotel for a couple of days and visited relatives there before we started for California. And I drove over to Moline and brought them cigars and stuff, and announced I'd gotten married. And I stopped at a Ford place right on Main Street there. And I don't know what, I went in there for something and started talking to the parts man, and here he had a 41 Ford he'd sell with 10,000 miles or 11 or 12, just real low miles, a 2-door with a hot water heater and a south wind, because he said his wife was kind of cold, he had a south wind in it.
What's that mean, the south wind?
South wind was a gas heater that really heated. And of course, heaters weren't very good in the cars nowadays. So I paid $1,200 for it, I think, and called Frank and bought that.
But you still kept the car you had?
Yeah, but we had to go back to Sankra, to Frank's with a car. I wanted to get rid of that and take this other one, so went back and
drove one and you drove one?
No, yeah, no, I think I went and got Frank and brought him out, and he took it back, or I think. I'm not sure, can't remember. I don't think she drove because it was wintertime and snowy.
For the honeymoon.
Yeah. So then we really had it made. We started for California. We stayed in Curtis Hotel for 2 days. Started for California, and we got as far as Algoma, Iowa in a snowstorm. So we stopped there the first night. We had this good Ford. And we went out there. I don't know how many days it took us. And then Johnny Olson took care of us like his very own kind of, you know, took us to that famous place you eat with the birds. What's the name of that?
Capistrano? San Juan Capistrano?
Not Capistrano.
Down the coast? Or is it in Los Angeles?
There's a name for it. Yeah, right in Los Angeles. It's a great place to go to eat.
Huh.
You know, nothing, you know, to us it was really special.
Yeah, right.
And then Frank's friend, Bill Berry, was out in California, so he could look after us too, like I was his very own. So we drove out there.
How long did you stay out there?
Nah, we weren't gone too long, probably 10 days. And we went to see the Pearl's relatives, Moores. They were in Oak Creek.
Nellie and...
Walnut Creek, yeah. We went to see them, and they had moved from Colfax in the Depression times out west, and they had a girl that was in high school, and she had friends back here. Now, it'd be jiggered if she didn't want to ride back with us, so we come back. We took her along, and I don't know if I drove straight through. It seemed like I did, because I remember going through Wyoming in the middle of the night, and it was terribly cold, kind of snow blowing, drifting, and a wolf went across the road. I can remember that sight with the moonlight. And we got back fairly soon and dropped her off in Minneapolis. And I came back, and then we sold the car to a young guy in the insurance business at Cameron. And then after that, then I drove a Plymouth for a while. That wasn't so great. And then this new car came, and I had that, and I drove that for probably a year and a half.
So then you came back, Dad. You set up house in Sand Creek?
Well, no. Elaine was still nursing.
Well, she hadn't graduated yet. Or was she working?
No, she was graduated, but she wouldn't. Yeah, she was graduated because she wouldn't get married till she had Hank paid off.
Yeah.
She had him paid off, and she was working and kept her job. And of course, we had no place to live, so we were at Grandma's. And she'd come up.
Toycen.
Yeah, she'd come up weekends. And I can remember had the tractor, the load of manure on, and going out in the field, and she'd come running down from the house, wanted to ride. Jumped on behind me, and we drove out with a load of manure spreading. It was pretty fun.
So so you weren't together during the week? She was working then all
yeah,
week?
she was working. I'd go down on the weekend.
And where did she stay then?
Well, she rented a room. She had a room from some people right down below the hospital there. That were kind of odd people, but it was nice. And then after that, then we finally, she wanted, oh yeah, Mrs. Pruzik, we got her house. Where was Mrs. Pruzik? How did we get her house? Where was she? I can't think where she was, but we rented her house.
Down in Sand Creek?
Yeah, but where did she go? Because she wasn't there. I wonder if she didn't go out and stay with Mildred, I believe. So we had her house.
And which is her house?
Where Gavin is.
Oh, right.
Yeah, that was a start.
Right.
That's the first we lived together, then started cooking.
I didn't know that.
And they had the stove they had was it was a little old kerosene stove with two of those things that came up like that, and you lit it down here and the heat came up. And Elaine says, and I don't remember, she said we lived on tomato and lettuce bacon sandwiches. I can't remember. She didn't do much cooking. There wasn't much to cook with there. And we had that for a while, and then we finally...
That was a single-bedroom house? Or?
Yeah. Then well, there was a room upstairs, but it was a small little tiny house. And Tom had died, you see. And then we finally bought the Van Gilder house by Selmer's. And had bathroom put in, fixed it up. Then we thought we were really living, we had our own place. Because Dad wouldn't let me go on the farm. I wanted the farm, get him to move down. No, he said, I'm not going to walk around downtown. I want to work. So we couldn't get the job done on that. And we had that, I suppose, for a year or two. Probably all of that. And I remember we had the stucco patched and had it painted and, fixed it up with a bathroom. It was fairly decent. But it had so much bats upstairs. There was bat dirt that thick in the attic, and it had that smell. You couldn't get rid of it. But it was a beautiful location on the riverbank there. And then finally Herman's farm came up for sale.
Now, Dad, so when was Mom pregnant then? Did you have the house before she was pregnant? Or was that your
I think so, because I think you were on the floor. I think you were on the floor crawling around when Evelyn Ellison came back, that I gave a ride to California to see us. Seemed like that's right, but Elaine could almost sit on this to tell it better. But then Herman's farm was for sale.
This is Herman Hovland.
Yeah, yeah. He wanted to quit farming. And Julian Hansen had the first chance at it.
Who had owned that farm originally? Had it been in the Hovland family from
No, it belonged to Thompson. And Thompson had the farm that Newmans have. That was a big farm. They sold it to Julius Nelson and he lost it. And this Thompson built the house where the farm is now.
Had somebody in his family homesteaded it then, originally, do you think, or not?
Boy, I don't know.
Hard to know that.
I don't know. This Thompson was a real good guy, but he got killed with dynamite, I think, up in northern Minnesota or someplace he went after he sold that. So Herman bought it, and the house was, I think he built the house. I don't think Herman did, but then Herman had built a new barn in 40, and we bought it in 46. We bought it in 51, I think. 50 or 51, yeah.
That's my recollection.
And we did a lot around there, brush all over between the house and the barn. You couldn't walk there for brush. The toilet was right out there in the middle. We give Andrew the toilet, we put bathroom in. So that was the biggest step in my life, to have a farm row, and I just loved it.
What did you pay for it, Dad?
$11,000.
$11,000.
Yeah, yeah. And Herman borrowed, and Herman financed part of, most of it. I think the interest was 2% or 2.5%. And when he moved it south, and when I finally paid him off, I borrowed money so I could pay him off because I wanted to do things, and tears rolled down his face, and I paid him. He was so good to me and so happy that I got it. But I didn't finish the part. Julian had first chance at it. And when Herman found out we wanted, he felt real bad because he liked Dad and wanted us to have it. Hi! He wanted us to have it. And we met Herman. No, we met Herman on the...
I'm sorry, just Julian Nelson wanted it?
Julian Hansen.
Oh, Julian Hansen.
Yeah, he was renting the Shorty farm, that farm.
Where he was?
Yeah.
Oh, I see.
And no, not where he was. He was renting the farm, the Solom farm that we had from a guy in Auburn. He had had it many years. And Herman, let's see, how did it go? We met Herman on the farmer's store steps, Dad and I. And we walked over to him, and he said, you can have it. Julian thought it was too much money, so we snapped it right up. And I had the money from Frank then, you see, the $2,500, I think it was, or $3,000, whatever it was.
From the place, from the Oscar Hovland farm you bought.
And I don't remember how much more I put in, but anyway, we got that handled. But you see, I kept expanding, and I owed money on it all the time, kind of, because I was improving it so much. Put bathroom in and a furnace. And so that was our start farming. And you came along, but you were a baby when you were in Shankrigg.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that was a really nice spot near the river and all. It was just perfect.
Okay, then somewhere in all this too, Dad, you had moved from auto sales.
Oh yeah, we were at auto sales. We were down at auto sales when we lived there in the Van Gilder house, and that was a time that was the biggest shock I've ever had in my life. You and Susie were on your trikes. And it was kind of dangerous there because Eldred Hovland was home and Bruce was there, and the trikes were going back and forth across the street, and I was wanting to get out so bad. And of course, this farm came up, so it kind of saved our neck. But I was down at the garage, and it was spring of the year, flood, lots of high water, and she came running down and said, I can't find the kids.
Mom did.
And I raced up there as fast as I could and went down there behind Cedar Nelson, where Chuck Sparby lives, Henry Nelson's place, and you could see the back of Gilbert's Motors there. There stood the two trikes on the bank. It's funny I didn't die of a heart attack, and I ran down to the water trying to look and tried. Just didn't know what to do, didn't know where to start, because I figured you'd floated down the river. And then here you guys come, I don't know, you showed up. I was so weak I couldn't go to work. I just stayed around for a long time. That was really that's the worst scare I've ever had in my life, because we just thought you were both gone. The two trikes stood there and no kids.
So that was Susie and me.
Yeah, you'd left the trikes, and they had a motor, an outboard motor they were starting behind the garage in a barrel or something, and that was making noise, and you had walked up so we didn't see you watching that, and then spotted you. Boy, that was something. Yeah. Part of raising a family. It scares. So then, of course, auto sales was going pretty good, and at that time already I was on the road with this big GMC truck buying thrashing machines and bringing hay loaders in. I'd go to Iowa and get 3 hay loaders and
this was used?
Used ones, and sandwich them on the truck, you know, and come back with them, and we'd sell them just like popcorn. So that got real good, and I was so ambitious, you know, that I could see the money that could be made that way, but I couldn't get Frank to ever go with me. He just stayed home, wanted to put machinery together. Didn't want to go anyplace. And then, of course, in the wintertime, we'd buy big tractors and ship out of the country, and I'd buy cars. And I remember one time we must have had 4 Studebaker cars I bought from the Studebaker dealer in Eau Claire, and then wholesale them to dealers in Minneapolis, and we'd buy Chevys and we'd buy Fords.
Because they could get better prices in the bigger cities.
Yeah, we'd wholesale them to those jockeys that were pretty hot. You know, and there was no OPS, then you could get whatever you could sell them for.
And these were used?
Yeah. No, new, all new. All new, yeah. Right. Then I started going...
So they'd actually do that. They'd sell them new to you, and then you'd sell them to somebody else.
Snooze would bootleg them to us. Hearts would bootleg them to us. And, of course, you know, everybody thought Snooze was the most perfect man around Chautauqua. He was the law of cars. Nobody ever knew he was doing that. Yeah, he'd say, yeah, he said, I think I'll sell you this cockroach. He'd say, he'd go up to his farm, it'd be up in the haymow in the driveway. We got a kick out of that. So a lot of them would come to us because they knew we'd pay the prices because we had the market. And what happened... Irene and Melvin went up to Warren, Minnesota when they were first married, had services, and he wasn't Pentecostal yet then, and I don't remember if it was Baptist people or what. And there was a guy by the name of Everett Johnson up there that was an auctioneer and a nice farmer that was one of their followers. And I got to know him, and he wanted Moline plows. And then he had a good friend that was a used car jockey by the name of George Strandberg that talked like he just came from Norway with a real brogue. Good people, you know. Oh, those Western guys were good. So I went up there, and I'd stayed with Everett when I'd come up there, and I'd go up there with stuff and sell, and started hauling pickups. And I had guys driving with me, like Oscar Hovland would go, Fred Blakely, Ed Teets, all these old timers. They just loved to go. And we had a Kaiser Manhattan that we bought from somebody in Chautauqua that was selling them on the Carlson. I bought it new, I think. And that was our top one. And that car was ahead of its time. It was wide like the Cadillac inside, you know, much more room than a Chevrolet. And balanced good. It had traction in snow. Frank would back a Chevrolet in the snow, and you couldn't go any farther, stuck, and just back this thing in right by it and just walk right out, just the way it was balanced. And they had a flathead engine in them, and they had an overdrive, and we had that just for those trips. And I would start out at 4 in the morning with a bunch of those old geezers, and we'd have 5 rigs. 5 rigs we'd go out with, cars and pickups. And then sometimes I'd have a plow in the back of a pickup knocked down. Moline, they scoured good up there, and they were really hot stuff, and this Everett wanted them. And 3 bottoms we'd get.
What do you mean they scoured good?
They would scour the heavy, it would clean on it had the best board of anything. Really were hot. And I could get them. So I'd load up a couple of them, make more on the plow than I did on the pickup in there, and we'd run up there. And I don't remember how much we made, but probably a couple $100 on each pickup or 3, but it was a lot of money, you know? And old George, he'd say, he was so funny. He'd get there, we'd get there about 2 in the afternoon, he'd say, yeah, he said, I look, I see, I hear, I don't see anybody coming, he'd say to us. Write us a check for it. And then we'd head back home, and we'd get home about 4 in the morning. And I did that many times every week. But Frank always had to stay home. He had them piles, you know, he never wanted to go anyplace. He had to pack them back every day. But then finally, he went to Eau Claire and had that fixed up. Did you ever hear that story?
No.
Oh, boy. Can I tell that to you on here?
Sure.
No. Anyway, he was such a homebody, you know, because he claimed every morning when he had BM, he'd have to pack them back in, you know, with Vaseline. She never wanted to go anyplace. That was his excuse. Well, some doctor scared him, said you'll get cancer if you don't get this done. So he went to Luther to have him fixed. And he had the operation. He didn't stay overnight. And he called me to come down. So I drove down by myself. And I got down there, and I'll just do it from here.
Hang on, I gotta follow you with the camera if you just stand up. Just a minute. Just a bit. Okay, go ahead.
I got down there, and here's Frank laying across the bed like this with his feet hanging down. Muskie, take me home. Muskie, take me home, he said. Oh, I said, you can't go. Yep, I'm going home. I want to go home. So then the fun part of this was, he went home, and of course he was terribly sore. I guess when you have a bowel movement, it's like nails going through you for a few days. But he got over it real well, and you think of all the years he worried and dreaded, and then with the operation it was 100%. Never ever had trouble again. So we've always kind of chuckled about that. You put something off. So that's the story with that.
And now, Dad, you were still working out of auto sales, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So, but you left at some point, right?
Well, in 1952, in about September, Corky McDonald called up one day and said, meet me at Costner's office in the hall, he said. Want to see you. And I went down there. And
Costner was a lawyer? Or?
Yeah. Above where Clausen's office was, the doctor's office.
In Bloomer?
Yeah, right above the wayside, or not the wayside, the supper club where Barlow's Insurance is, and right above there, that next story. That's where the doctor's offices were. And meet me there, and I don't know if Frank went with me or not. He must have, probably did. And Corky was there, and Corky had been chasing around a lot, and finally got himself in trouble. He was going with a Lair girl. And the family was getting shaky, and he was running to Chicago. She was in Chicago, and he said, I gotta get out of town. He wanted to sell me his business, his half, for $10,000. And he said, but I'd like it back in a year. That was all right, so we'd come in there to run it. Well, it was a real source. We were getting 3/4 of all their Pontiacs because they couldn't sell as many as they were.
So you'd already done business with him?
Oh, we've been buying lots of stuff from him. And he was a finagler worse than me out of the zone to get stuff from him. You know, everybody liked him. So we just took over where he left off. And I went over there to run that, and Frank was supposed to stay and run the auto sales and sell machinery and stuff. But he'd bought cattle, you see, cows like I did. We bought Sophus-Nor's herd. And I think we split the herd. There were 16 cows, I think, and we each took 8, or maybe it was more. And then I got Dad's cows, so we were farming at Herman's, and then Frank started milking cows, and he loved that. So he kind of forgot about auto sales right away. He just kind of quit selling after I left. And he'd always say, you can sell better than I can, and you know, and always encouraged me to go out to see everybody, and he just wanted to put machinery together. So that thing was kind of like a dead horse, and I was down in Bloomer then, running that thing, and I was having a good time. I liked cars because I didn't have to load machinery and stuff. It was a lot easier.
Who was the partner at that point?
Bob Burns, Corky's partner. Well,
was he active in the business?
Oh yeah, but he was older. All he did was fix radiators and liked to go over town and have a brandy all the time and follow me around, but he couldn't sell nothing. Never had. Corky was the front man. And we were together a year, and Corky didn't want it back. And then we bought him out because I just said, you know, I'm not going to be here. There's not enough for 2. So we bought Burns out.
Now, had Frank joined you?
No, he wanted to stay on the farm, and he kept staying on the farm.
So this was on your own?
I was running it, yeah. And then, you see, this is 53, I suppose, when we bought him out. Might have been close to 54. And it went pretty well. And then in 57, we took on International Harvester. And then we came home from church in 57, the fall of the year, from the little chapel, and I heard him announce there'd be no more Hudson cars. They'd be American Motors Rambler. And
well, just to be clear, you were only selling Pontiac at that point, right?
Yeah.
And did you have pickups, GMC pickups, or not?
No, International. We took on International, the light duty model.
And was that, you did that, or that was already there?
No, I did that. Dave Nadler was the roadman, signed me up. And then when I heard this on the Rambler, because 57 was a tough year with Oldsmobile. They made a big change in their car, like that antique I had, and it didn't go over. It was tough. And Clarence Wright was over in Minnesota, and he was Oldsmobile and Chevrolet at Lee Center. And he was real good to me. He would sell me used cars to try and keep us going. And the bank wouldn't borrow any money, you know, it was tough. And I had to buy used cars to keep going. And then he'd finance them through his bank for me. Really helped me out. He was a dear friend. And that got me going. Well, then, when I heard this Rambler thing, I said to Elaine, I'm going to get that franchise. I came to work, and Ruth Ringer was a bookkeeper, and I didn't want her to know a thing about it. So I went over to the telephone office, and I was in a payphone outside. And I called American Motors. And the next day, there's the roadman, Ray Selzer was the roadman.
From American Motors.
Came up. We made out a financial statement together and we went right through. And that saved my neck. I sold about 140 a year for 2 years of those things. And that's when I was taking we had taken the Dale Carnegie course together, Frank and Bun and Elaine and I, with all the other businessmen in Bloomer and their wives, which was a great thing. It turned Frank and her around, especially Bun. And then Frank and I were taking a sales course in Rice Lake, an advanced sales course with it. We had all these terrific chicken raisers like Sig Undershoots, you know, bragging about holding a check up. It's some big deal he'd made to somebody on money investing in his operation. And we had a lot of success stories there. And it was quite good, and I would have real trouble getting home in time to pick up Frank and go. And I hardly get time to eat. I was so busy selling these Ramblers because they were like popcorn, and they were just really going. And I was finagling getting them out of the guy that was the zone manager, and I just really hit it off. Oh, he was good to me. He would just give me anything I wanted. Just call him up and give me something. I'm trying to think of his name, but it'll come to me. So I said to Frank, I think you want this in there. I said to Frank, I said, you know, I'm burning the candle on both ends. I said, you know, you goofed when you got out of the business, because I'd bought him out. I was on my own, see. I said, you goofed. I said, it's really getting good. And I said, I just can't begin to handle it. I got so much business. And he said, kind of with a sigh, yeah, Muskie, probably I did. And I made not the mistake, but I said, well, I guess if you want to come back in, you sure can. That's all I said. The next week we went again, Muskie. I did a lot of thinking I'd like to come back. So I let him back. And then you see, about that time, Nettie had to have surgery on her foot. And then she had put money in a place in the drawer, and Bun found $100 and some and said, what's this for? Oh, Nettie said, when I'm over, I put it there, and when I'm short and balancing the till, she said, I take it out of there. Well, Hemlock Dick was our CPA. We finally got to a good CPA. Frank wanted a good CPA, so we knew what we were doing instead of depending on Costner, you know? And Hemlock says she's got to go, so we had to let her go. And of course, Bun had come over to help when she was sick, you know, when she was laid up. They worked together a while. And that was a turning point in her life, because she took the carnine, got over her dad killing the neighbor and suicide, you know. That came out in that course. She told that in one of her talks.
This is Bunded.
Yeah, it was really, really touching. Told about how good her dad was to her, and yet what he did. And so then she took over, took the job. And that was the happiest days of Bun's life. She was a terrific bookkeeper, and everybody loved her. You know, they just liked her. So she stayed with us till she really had to retire. It was past time to retire. So then, then after this, I got into big trucks. Really was selling them, and I think it scared her. All the paper I was on several $1 million worth, which wasn't good. But they'd buy anything we'd sign, you know. And I was selling trucks, and these truckers were doing good. Then Carter got in and deregulated trucking and got the fuel up to $1 a gallon, and they came back like popcorn. And before that happened, I was alone then, but Bun still worked for me. And she said, Muskie, she said, it's not fair. Frank isn't contributing. He was getting $200 a week and not doing nothing. She said, this isn't fair. You should own it alone. And he was real fair, what it was worth when he came in and what the net worth was. So I bought him out for real peanuts, and I think I paid him off at $200 a week, or $200, so much a month. You know, it wasn't a hard, no interest. So I bought him out, and that's when I called Daniel and said, well, I bought Frank out. If you want to come in with me, you can. And he said, well, he'd have to think about it. But he said, I think I'd be foolish not to. And it was in the spring of the year. He was teaching his first year. So then he finally called back and said he wanted to come in with me. So that that saved my neck, because the business was getting so big, and we got into some real trouble with truck paper, you know, that really was serious. We lost $500,000, you know, and just that we didn't have. And I had such good credit, I could get 20 grand at the creamery, you know, in advance, and borrow 10 grand from Bob Barlow and pay him back in a week and say how much interest I owe you, and he'd say what are friends for, you know, never would take a dime. So that's why we're so loyal to the family. They're just wonderful people. And with Dan coming in, we made it, but without Dan, I would have had to gone down. And Dan was a real conniver on money. Oh, he could finagle. Just unreal. I thought I could, and everybody trusted as a bankers and all, they would just do anything for you. But he could sure do it. Worked on a float, you know, like you can't believe, and never always handled it. But I had the backing, so if something came up, I could go get it, so we never ever got squeezed, and it got better and better and better. And, you know, it's behind us, but it took us about 4 years to get that monkey off our back. So that's...
That with that money, Dad, the $500,000 were just truckers that went bankrupt?
Bankrupt.
And so you got the truck back, and it was the difference in what the value of it versus...
Stole the tires off from a lot of them. It was really an awful deal. That's why we got out of trucks as soon as we could, and I never want to get in big trucks because you have to go on the paper. Now in cars, you're never on the paper, so we have no risk anymore. Plus you still make money on the paper, you sell. Right. So that made a lot, and that's why I'm so devoted to Dan, because he saved my neck, and yet he's so good to me that I couldn't be happier. I mean, he just treats me, it just floors me, because you know, so many times when somebody buys something out, they push you out. They don't want you around. It's just the opposite, you know. So if you know, I have no regrets. Just so glad, and I'm glad I got a lot of insurance, so he'll be well taken care of when I go, and I'm sure it's not that far away, and Mother will be taken care of, and that's where I have a little trouble, because I won't talk about this now, but I'll talk about it afterwards before we get broke up. So anyway, that's the story.
Dad, I wanted to back you up a little bit.
Yeah.
Something that we missed that was pretty significant. Back early on in your family life, you got polio.
Mm-hmm, in 1949.
Yeah, tell us how that happened.
Well, in 1949, I was hauling machinery to Albert Lea, Minnesota, to Clarence Wright and Jim Donahue. There were a couple idols that we learned to know through machinery jockeying that were straight-laced, and they split up too, but they were together yet then, and they had a used lot at Albert Lea, and we would haul them combines, corn pickers, and then they'd help me find, you know, thrashing machines and stuff. And I was on the road. I think we sold 40-some thrashing machines that year, and you kids were little, and it was hard to get sleep at home. So what I would do, for an example, I'd leave about 4 o'clock in the afternoon with this GMC truck, and I'd head for Albert Lea down that way, and I would go empty, because I didn't have anything to haul down. I'd go into Iowa, and I'd start driving, and I had an implement dealer that tipped me off on a few thrashing machines, but I'd go down right through the country roads and watch for a little narrow building that housed a thrashing machine. And you see, they'd all quit thrashing, they'd all gone to combines, but these things were sitting there in that black soil, you know, with a shed over them. And I'd stop and see them and find out maybe 4 farmers owned it, and I'd buy them for real low money, $300-400. And some of them were just like new. And then I had a couple big heavy planks. We called them piss elm. They were about that thick. Set them behind, get them on the thing. They'd get a tractor and hook on the side and pull it on the truck. Well, I did this all by myself. You know, Frank never went with me on this. And the tongue would come up on the planks like this, and it got near the cab. Then you'd take the tongue and you'd turn it around so the tongue faced back, and we'd roll it ahead up to the bang board that was about this high behind the cab to that. And then I chain it down with 4 chains on each axle. I had a beautiful rack. And the header, where the brain bundles went in, we'd have that folded out, so that went over the cab, and I'd have it light chain and tie that to the bumper so it didn't go like this up and down. And then I would tie a chain to the back axle, right to the back end of the rack if I run into something, so it wouldn't come through the cab. And then I'd take off for home. And those things pulled real hard because of the wind resistance, you know. Oh, they pushed hard. And that truck would be running, just grunting all the way, you know, and we could run 45, maybe hardly ever get up over 50 much. And I'd come down through from Rochester, that road 42 to Durand and that way. And I did that. I'd get home about 4 in the morning probably. Or maybe sometimes it'd be later because it'd be getting light sometimes when I'd come in. And I remember stopping between 64 and Sand Creek. I was so tired. I couldn't keep awake. And I'd get out and run and get back in and make her in. And I'd pull in with it, and Frank would pick it up and take it and unload it, and usually have it sold. The farmers would be waiting to look at it. And I'd go home and try and sleep. You know, and it was a little tough with the noise of kids in the daytime and hot, no air conditioning. So then I'd leave about 4 o'clock in the afternoon and repeat this. And then I'd go as far as Albert Lee, and I'd get a cheap motel and a good place to eat there that I got to know the spots. Then I'd leave and go down into Iowa and do the same thing again.
Day after day like that.
Oh yeah, I did this, and I was so run down, I think, and I was a 72nd patient in Albert Lee that got polio, because Bill Nelson was with me that last trip. I went from our place with a combine to Fargo, dropped the combine off in Fargo or Detroit Lakes, loaded a corn picker on that they didn't need up there, and I headed down to Albert Lee with a picker. And I went past Minneapolis to the west, going down there. And I was running a fever when I left. I thought I had the flu, and Bill went along just for the fun of it. And I remember he drove quite a bit after I left there the next day. And I was burning up with a fever. We got to Albert Lee and got a motel, and hotel I think it was. And at 5 o'clock in the morning I said, I can't take it any longer, I got to go to the hospital. So he got up and we went to the hospital, and they run a spinal check on me, and I had polio. And I had a $10 insurance policy Dermont sold us. So I got the last bed at Kenny.
At Sister Kenny and
Yeah, they called and I got the last bed, and the ambulance took me from Albert Lee up there. And
$10 insurance policy saved
paid everything. Yeah, saved that. Yeah, Dermont did that. That was a plus. Isn't that something?
Yeah.
And then when I got there, we were in a room. Well, it would be the size of where the window was, the half of that window over to the cement, and there were 4 beds in there along the wall, you know, singles, and that's the room I got into. And I had a fine fellow from northern Minnesota that had polio that was there ahead of me, that his doctor was treating him for the flu. He was way up in northern Minnesota and thought he had the flu. And when you get there, they give you an enema right away, and that helps lessen the paralysis. And I couldn't hardly walk, you know, I was so stiff, just got stiff all over. And it was pretty scary. So, of course, a lot of people were worse, and this guy had been there ahead of me, and he was really paralyzed. And he was 20-some years old, he worked for the county, and I went back to see him, I think once or twice after I got out, and his legs were like this. There was just no muscle on them. It was just sad. Just because the doctor didn't know what he was doing, you know. And then the hot packs came in at that time. That was a new discovery of Kinney's. And they would have like a washing machine that would be just full of these hot packs steaming of army blankets. And they'd throw them on your back and drape you with them and just cook you. And that would soften the muscles so you wouldn't paralyze. So all I lost is muscle here, and I lost that after I got home. Because I was taking a hot bath every day, and it got so warm that I stuck my hand on the cold tub, and I felt it just knot up and just pull. So I got a dip. I got a dip right here. I don't know if I ever showed you that.
No, I don't.
Right here, there's no muscle right there. So if I want to open a jar of...
Where is that again, Dad? Where's...
Right here. There's no muscle right here.
Hang on, let me get into that. Just hold your arm out this way.
Yeah.
Okay. Huh. Now show the dip.
The dip is right here. I put the other one that's much higher there, and there's muscle, and I lost it. I felt that pull up just like a knot when I did that, and that was it. But when I want to open a fruit jar or anything, I always use my left hand. I got much more strength in my left hand than my right.
Huh.
So that was a polio experience.
And in terms of the experience, you mean people were dying around you?
Oh, sure. The Mako boy from Spooner was right out in the hall. He had bulbar polio, and I heard them fighting to keep him going, but he made it, and he never got paralyzed from it. He was fine. But then this gal was in an iron lung right outside of our room. I could see her head. And Dr. Seljaskov, I can see him slapping her cheeks, trying to keep her going, and that thing go pumping, you know, and she died. Oh yeah, no, it was bad. It was bad that year.
And how long were you in the hospital?
Well, I was in Kinney's for a while, then they transferred me to Swedish, and I was supposed to stay there longer, but Mother was pregnant with Gail, and it was such a worry, you know, that pregnant people, if they got it, it was so much more dangerous. And I was just concerned to get home, I guess, so I kind of talked my way out, but I wasn't ready to go. I wasn't stretched out enough, but they could not get me with a hot pack and all, so I could bend down and put my head between my knees. That's what you're supposed to do. It would have broken my back, because something was wrong the way my back is, that I couldn't do that, so I never did get that far. And so I got home plenty early, because when I got home, I hadn't been home too long, and Slews came down to see us in the evening, and Mother got pains, labor pains, and we had to leave, and I had a 49 Chiv that I bought from Hart's, his demo. Had quite a few miles.
So you were back when Gail was born?
Yeah.
You'd come home?
And I was going to take her down to Luther. And I was going down the hill just before you hit 40 from Colfax, before you hit 29, that long grade, and I felt the car kind of start swinging. I had a flat tire. And I stopped up on the top there before you get on the highway to change it and to go in on 12. And the spare only had about 15 pounds in it, but I was so weak that I couldn't turn the nuts on. You know, Mother had to do it. But we got it changed, and we made it by just a few minutes, and Gail was born. So that was a streak of luck, I guess.
Right. So when you came back home then, did you try to work right away, or what?
Yeah, I tried to, but Frank told me one time we were loading machinery, and I walked, he saw me get up and walk, and it just made him sick. I was so stiff, I couldn't move very good in my back and that. And they told me that at Madison I went for a physical a year or so later, and they said I shouldn't do any heavy work or I'd get some disease in my back. But all my life I could lift all I could lift, and it never bothered my back. I never had much trouble, but I ached a lot on my back and muscles, and shooting pains across here, and I've had all of that since polio. Now I don't even have that anymore since I got on those pills Stockman got me. So, but that polio, weather changes, I'd get cold, and I froze so the first winter. I could sit right on the hot oil burner stove in the office, and I would just shook. It killed so many, is it white cells or something in your body? It takes a long time to build them back. And they didn't give you no medicine, just the hot packs, and that was all. And I was just fortunate that I didn't get paralyzed, you know. But it taught you something. I saw people so much more worse off, and it just makes you understand and be appreciative of what you got.
Yeah.
But it took me a couple of years before I got really, so I felt quite normal. But so.
And then at the same time you got the car business. You got.
Oh yeah. Well, when I got to the Swedish hospital, I got a phone put in my room. And I was buying and selling machinery and calling Moline, and they'd call me and say, could you use another corn picker? And I'd call Frank, he'd go get it and deliver it. We were just wheeling. They didn't know what we were doing, but they just liked us, and they were so good to me. So, this is the fun I've had, with people. I like people, and I guess I'm gifted. I'm beginning to think to get people to like me without putting on an act or anything, which I don't. I'm genuine, and people seem to pick that up. That's what I said to Elaine. I said, I think you and I have a lot in common, because I see the quality you have, that they get to like you. Now, Dan has the same quality, but it comes out slower. But when people get to know him, they really like him. But